All right, we're back. Hopefully you've been able to find this stream. Really sorry there. Just for a few moments, Brad was administering CPR to the Dell. It had a little heart murmur, but we got it back. Hopefully Facebook and YouTube will support it properly with some decent live support now for the rest of the session this evening. But let's get on with some clinics. We're back to live clinics with Q&A, so we want you to be asking questions now in the chat, and we'll put these questions to our next presenter, who is Tim from Wisconsin. Tim's been a model railroader since he was 12 years old, when he convinced his dad to get into the hobby with him. He is a member of the Wisconsin and Michigan Model Railroad Club, and also a member of River Rail out of La Crosse, Wisconsin. We have Dave Berman, the great Dave Berman of the Grain, to thank for having Tim with us. And so, Tim, welcome to NMRAX.
Thank you. It's my first clinic with NMRA, so thanks for having me.
Cool. So if you can share your presentation.
Sounds good. We'll just launch the PowerPoint here, and we'll be good to go. Can we see that?
Yeah, we're seeing that. That's all great.
Very good. So I've been very fortunate that I've gotten to know a number of people with the railroad car ferry operation over Lake Michigan. I've been part of the SS City of Milwaukee group for a while, and I've known a lot of guys who model the boats, who work the boats, who switched out the boats. So this is a lot of the fruits of knowing a lot of the people who are really experts in these things, and just a little sketch of the Lake Michigan car ferry operation centered out of Kewaunee, Wisconsin. I'm actually modeling this on my layout, and I'll talk a little bit about what I'm up to that way as well. So first question is, why haul railroad cars across Lake Michigan? Well, back in the day, it was a lot faster to go across the lake than through Chicago. Back then, you had all the waybills and stuff, and it could take a week or more. You get any kind of snow in Chicago, it would take multiple weeks to get a railroad car through Chicago. And so the lakes provided a 4-hour shortcut straight across. And this connection also allowed the Ann Arbor, Pierre Marquette, CNO on the Michigan side, and of course the Green Bay and Western, Sioux and Milwaukee on the Wisconsin side, to have increased haul miles and added traffic, and created a really new and fast and flexible east-west railroad corridor, just really streamlined to serving the customers. And then of course, for any guy, boats and trains, what's not to love? Car ferry named the Ann Arbor and Frankfurt. So actually Kewaunee was one of the first port, if you will, on the Wisconsin side. In 1897, the Pierre Marquette got in the action and built a steel car ferry 260 feet. Of course, the later boats would be anywhere from 360 to 430 feet long. And they also started working in Kewaunee a number of years after that. In the 1920s and 30s was really a boom time with a lot of new boats being built. In fact, in the 1930s, the city of Flint set a record for 1,010 crossings made in 1 year, with 101,000 miles being traveled. These boats were icebreaker class, and they ran in all weather, and they just kept going back and forth. World War II also saw a great increase in the number of boats and crossings. So here's a map from the Ann Arbor Railroad during that time period. You can see the connection basically between Frankfurt and Kewaunee, linking the east and west. And here's actually a shot of that original boat, the Ann Arbor 1. Again, it was made out of wood. In fact, the hull was made out of oak, and the guys talk about how it used to really flex, especially in ice. And here's a shot of it in the 1890s being switched out by Green Bay and Western 440. Here's another shot from the 1890s, and again, you can see the 440 steam engine there, and the whole thing was made out of wood that these early boats had, of course, both being made completely out of wood. Is that the apron actually has a bit of an incline to it because the boat isn't full yet, so it's not that low in the water at this point. And here's another shot from 1908 showing the early Kewaunee Peninsula and yard. And you have another Ann Arbor boat there, sitting there. And again, 440s for the KGB&W switching it out. And just moving forward into the 1950s then, here's a publicity shot that was done of the Kewaunee Ferry yard and dock. So in the 40s and later, you actually had a 7-track yard as seen in this picture with 2 slips. And the way the tracks were numbered is towards the Lake Michigan side, which is the right side of the image, would have been track 9, and then all the way through slip 1. So 7 yards and 2 slips. And in this picture as well, you have an Ann Arbor boat, what it looks like. Also on the peninsula is a Coast Guard station, and you can see that white structure with a little cupola there. It's a Coast Guard station. You also notice a bunch of automobiles lined up next to the city of Flint, and that's because the railroad cars would, or the railroad car ferries would actually haul passenger cars and passengers across the lake as well. So they would actually line up the cars, and as soon as the railroad cars were on, they would drive all the automobiles. And many of the boats had planking in the back of the boat that they could actually park the cars over the rails. This is a really cool shot from 1922, and you can just see Ann Arbor 7 on the right, and then a Pierre Marquette boat on the left, and just the Ann Arbor boat is actually in one of the docks and slips, and then the Pierre Marquette boat is coming out. Here's a shot from 1948, again, still under steam, and you can see there's 2 boats in the slips. There's Pierre Marquette 22 and the Ann Arbor 7, which are actually kind of sister ships. You can see they're very similar in construction. What I love about this shot too is you can just really get a sense. They would really load one boat at a time. You didn't have more than one switch crew working the boats at any given time, but you would have multiple boats arrive at the same time on any given train crew shift. It's a neat shot, another publicity shot from 1953. So a lot of paper ran east on the Green Bay and Western, and you can see some of the FA1s there as well. And so just commemorating that with an old 40-foot boxcar there. And here, again, another publicity shot, but they're actually unloading passenger cars here from the Ann Arbor for Green Bay and Western. They're going to run what they call the Miller Specials, which was a special tour given to shippers of the Green Bay and Western line, which ran all the way across the state of Wisconsin. And so these passenger cars are being used for this special, of course, being switched out by one of the FA1s of the KGB&W. And now we're getting into some of the classic power 1957. So here's the RS-11 309, which would later have a chopped nose. And you can see some of the GBW reefers being loaded into the Ann Arbor 6. And here you may notice that the boat is actually tilted a little bit, because when they were loading the boats, they would actually list from the weight of the train cars, and the bridge or the apron would actually take that and be able to adjust to it. A lot of my friends say that I should be listing and tilting my boats on my layout, but I just don't know how HO track and fast track switches are going to respond to that too well, but we may have to experiment a little bit. Here's another shot from 1952, and we're on the top of one of the boats, and you can just see the yard. It's pretty empty on this day. But notice how there's a long string of cars coming in. So the crews would actually either pull the cars as a string or load them as a single string. So you can see that taking place, and it looks like it's one of the RS2s, the 302 is doing the switching on that. Here's another Pierre Marquette boats, maybe the Flint, and you can also notice that tracks 9 and 8 have no cars in them, which basically means that they're still pulling the cars from the boat. In fact, if you look to the right, you'll notice that you have a pair of engines sitting there, RS units with a couple of cars that they probably just pulled off the boat, and they're going to be backing them into the yard. Notice also up above, you'll notice that there's a crane sitting there, and I've got a pretty lengthy description here. So this is July of 1966, photo by Mike Dunn. So you've got them loading the boat. It's an Ann Arbor boat, and they're loading on auto racks from the yard track 4. And then you also have a P&H crane on one of the flat cars, while the other flat car has a boom section. So they did haul all kinds of stuff over on the boats. These P&H cranes came from Harnsflager plant in Escanaba, Michigan, and then they were routed from the ELNS from Escanaba to Channing to the Milwaukee Road to Green Bay, and of course hit the Green Bay and Western to Kewaunee. So they could not go to C&W out of Escanaba because of low bridge restrictions somewhere up in the UP. But Dan, one of the GBW guys I reference, he believes that almost all went to C&O, hence the small gap between the crane and the boxcar behind the trine levels. They were probably moving on a C&O boat later that day. Sometimes this picture you can see boats. Also to the left, you can see slip 1, which doesn't have a boat docked to it at this point. Here's a neat shot. So this is one of the RS-305, which was the first one actually modified. You'll notice that it has gray trucks. So it was an experimental paint scheme for GB&W to have gray trucks. You'll notice, looking back towards the BN grain car there, that the boat is very much listing as they're loading it. And you also notice that there's a flat car and a gondola in between the engine and the cars because you did not want to put the engine on that apron, on that bridge, otherwise you would collapse it. Here's a few boat trains running. So the boat trains ran between Green Bay, which would be the Norwood yard, the main yard between Green Bay and Western, and then run down to Kewaunee. So just kind of a bottom is left. It's getting pretty. Here's a nice shot of the yard. So just to kind of explain what we're looking at here. So you had the 7-track yard to the left. You can see the ladder track. And then to the right was a track that led to both slips. And I'll be showing that a little bit more clearly as we go. But here you got the C424, the 320, switching out the cars and basically categorizing them, getting them ready to go on the boats. And here's a nice shot of the first run of the 313, which had a special paint scheme. And that was its first run down to the ferries. And then sadly, these are pictures of the last boat train that ran. So it ran on November 16th, 1990. It marked 98 years of car ferry service out of Kewaunee, which of course was the first port of call in Wisconsin. And it was the Badger that actually was the last boat running under MWT. A little bit later, the Badger would be bought and converted over to hauling automobiles across the lakes. Now the Badger still has the tracks underneath the asphalt on the deck, but you wouldn't really put many cars in anymore because they've kind of got a double deck type thing going to get more automobiles inside its massive car deck. But here you can see on the bottom right as the Badger sails out of Kewaunee for the last time. So why did this car ferry stop running? Well, really the computers. Things got a lot more efficient around and through Chicago and basically solved the bottleneck. And so it became a whole lot cheaper to just route cars around Chicago, even if it still took a little bit longer versus running the boats, maintaining the boats, all the labor of the boats. Also, C&O in Ann Arbor, which owned the boats that ran into Kewaunee at this time, just wanted to span the service. GB&W kept trying to keep it going. In fact, in the 80s, there was a lot more cars heading east than were coming west because GB&W were trying to keep the service going where C&O and Ann Arbor were trying to get out of it. And of course, labor costs and then old equipment. The boats were getting old. A lot of these have been running for 50 years, 40 years at this point. So let's talk a little bit about the Kewaunee car ferry operations. Here's a promotional flyer. You can see that aerial shot on the right again. Kewaunee. And this allowed interchange to both Ludington and Frankfurt in the Lower Peninsula. There were 2 slips and 7 tracks, as we said. One of the interesting operational things is there was a yard limit milepost. It was milepost 33.5 out of Norwood. And that was the interchange point for the Ann Arbor and C&O. So as long as the GB&W got the cars across that yard limit sign, they were considered to be interchanged at that point, even if they were still sitting in the yard at Kewaunee, even if they had not been put on the boats. So the Green Bay and Western had great interest to get the cars past that yard limit before midnight. Or coming out of Green Bay, night train and day train. Train 2 would return as train 3 to Norwood and Green Bay. It would run upwards of 100 cars, and most of these cars were cars from Western Interchange. Remember, Green Bay and Western ran clear across the state to Winona, and so it would interchange with the BN and CB&Q at that time. And this night train would switch out 2 to 3 boats. You also had train 4, which was the day train, would return as day train 1. And it would normally have only 20 to 40 cars, and most of these cars were local traffic from Green Bay, the city of Green Bay itself. They would run extra trains to handle extra traffic if warranted. And there were a few times where they'd actually have a full yard of Kewaunee where you just see a couple of engines and a caboose running. They call it a caboose hop. And so that would probably kind of fun to see as well. Here is a timetable for what we're talking about. So the westward bound, you can see train 3, train 1. Train 3, of course, leaving at 11:59 p.m. and train 1 leaving at 12:45 p.m. So we would come back at 8:50 p.m. So you can see the time difference there, the night train and the day train. So when crews arrived at Kewaunee, having come from Norwood, they would arrive and first cut off the cars they brought with them. And if they have time to block them into tracks 3 and 7, they would. And they would block them between empties and loads, and also between the Ann Arbor Road and the C&O Road. So you basically had 4 different types of blockings going on: empties, loads, both for Ann Arbor and C&O. And then they would try to make up their setouts for each boat. And then when the boats would arrive, they would move immediately to unload them, using 3 to 4 empty cars as idlers, basically those cars to span the gap so that you weren't running the engines on the apron or inside the boat. Then these unloaded cars would be put on tracks 8 and 9, which are the 2 tracks closest to the lake. And these cars would sit for their return to the previous boat train and then loads that they brought down with them. Empties also ran across, because if you ran a load, you ran the empty back on the boat as well, but empties had lower priority. The tricky thing here is that boats would need to be balanced. I mean, they're boats after all, and these railroad cars are quite heavy, and the weight can greatly vary. So the conductor, on his way down in the caboose from Norwood and Green Bay to Kewaunee, would actually calculate these things out and figure out where to put all the cars on the boat. And then he would check it out with the first mates of the boat to make sure everything was good with his mathematics and stuff. And then they would basically repeat this operation for each boat coming in. Crews could switch out 2 to 3 boats on a given shift. The interesting thing is Kewaunee, the yard itself, did not have room to block or sort the cars coming off the boats. All this was done in Norwood. So basically, after they unloaded the boats, those went to tracks 8 and 9 and just sat there until they ran back to Green Bay. So what did it look like to switch out the boat? So here's a nice night shot of the Pure Marquette 22 getting ready to be switched out. So switching a boat took no more than an hour and a half. And this is, of course, after the cars and semis and passengers were off the boat. Then the railroad would usually take an hour to an hour and a half to unload and load. Here's a shot of a car deck. So I'm actually doing 3D models of these. So this is a rendering of the 3D model that I'm doing. And a couple of interesting things here. So you had number 5 turnouts inside the boats. You'll notice how the center tracks actually fan out a little bit as they go towards the back of the boat. And those are called the center tracks. And then you have the 2 wing tracks on the edges of the boat. Notice the guardrail, how far around it goes. This is actually prototypical, and that's just to protect the outer wall of the boat, because if one of those cars decided to come off the track, guardrail. But they were rail, you had to take it really slow because the 60-foot cars would get really close on clearances to the car deck walls. And so these were just very, very large inside. And of course, there would be track bumpers at the end, which I don't have modeled or shown in this model, if you will. So as I've mentioned, weight was a huge issue. The boats would list a lot if they were not properly loaded. One boat did flip, although that happened in Michigan. In Manistee, did not happen in Kewaunee, but it flipped, and they actually cut a hole in the side of the boat and took the railroad cars out with a crane, put a new plate back on the boat, and flipped her back around. The wing tracks were always unloaded first, especially if they were loads. And if they were loads, this would have to be done a half at a time. So you could have anywhere from 5 to 6 cars on that wing track, but you might have to take 2 out and then go to the other side and take another 2 or 3 out, and then go back to the side you started on, take the rest of them out, and then go on the second side and take the rest out. So you'd have to go back and forth, really managing the load. And not just the load left to right, but also from the bow to the stern, so that you didn't want to leave a lot of cars just on the bow and then raise a stern up huge. You wanted to really keep it balanced. So just a lot of things to keep in mind for the switch crews. And the first mate of the boat would be checking everything. In fact, the first mate would give the instructions to the switch crews how to unload the boat, because he was there when it was loaded. He knew what the loads and empties were, what the heaviest cars were. So the first mate would basically be directing the switch crew in the unload what to do, and the railroad crew had to give deference to what the first mate was telling them. Here is a shot inside the city of Green Bay, and you can see on the right there, on the other side, you can see some Sioux Line box cars and a grain car there sitting there. And if you look where it's washed out in on the apron, there's actually, they unloaded. And here's a very interesting shot. I can't quite figure this out because you got a stack of cars on the wing, but if you look to the left, there's nothing there. So these are definitely empties, but this is definitely not a normal way of loading or unloading a boat where you just have cars on the wings. This just shows that even if a model railroader unloads my boats in the wrong way, the railroad probably did it that way once as well. So as I mentioned, the center tracks would be unloaded after the wing tracks. And the center tracks would usually be done in one pull, unless there were extra heavy loads. They did haul some cars that were extremely heavy, like bentonite clay cars for the paper industry coming east. Also did some coil steel cars. So every once in a while, you had some really heavy cars that you might have to double pull a center track as well. Some of the heaviest cars though were clay cars, cement hoppers, fertilizer hoppers, coil steel cars. And a lot of times these had to be unloaded by themselves. So one car would be unloaded at a time, if you will. Could be put on only on the center tracks. And as I said earlier, if a 60-foot car was there, and you'd have great care. But if it was over 60 feet, forget it. It's going on the center track because it would never negotiate the curve of that number 5 turnout without hitting the car ferry wall. And here's a shot of a car ferry all loaded up. I love this picture because you see the bi-level with the Jeeps sitting in there. And this is actually the Viking right after she got refurbished. And just look at how clean it is. Just absolutely amazing. You can also see the paving on the tracks on the stern here where you could park automobiles as well. And here's a shot from the city of Midland, one of a favorite boat of a lot of the boat guys. And here you can see the Kewaunee docks from the passenger area of the city of Midland. One interesting note about this picture is notice a flat car with the automobile frames. So this is a bit of a misnomer because there were automobile frames that will come across from Michigan to Green Bay and Western for the Minneapolis Ford plant. But this is actually in the load tracks. And so there were auto frames made, I believe in southern Wisconsin, and oftentimes will come up and then get put on the boat and head west instead of always heading east. I also love the engines with the old red and gray paint scheme coming at us as well. So a little bit about paperwork. So it depends what era you do. If you do the pre-80s era, of course, it's all waybills. Each car had the waybill, of course. The conductor would make his own switch lists and cut lists in his caboose on the way down from Norwood to Kewaunee. And then he would also create a wheel report at the end of the day that documented when cars went past the yard limit and what was done with them. And that was kind of the handoff document to the next. But GB&W still used a lot of handwritten forms. And then they had to be entered, as many say, the GB&W ran on form, Norwood to Kewaunee or from Kewaunee to Norwood. So here's some interesting car movements that happened on the car ferries. So you'd have 65-foot gondolas with steel sheets and I-beams. You had a lot of New York Central, Pennsy, and other Eastern Railroad gondolas that would come across heading east. You also had a lot of coil loads, DT&I, Ann Arbor, and C&O coil cars, and these would run exclusively on the C&O boats. The Ford Fast, this was a really interesting operation, but they would haul auto parts from Michigan to Minneapolis, and the GB&W had to get them to Winona in the evening at a certain time in order to make the interchange with the Milwaukee Road. I believe they had to get them there by midnight, otherwise there was huge penalties. But you had a lot of these auto parts coming, and those were the hottest cars on the GB&W when they're running the service. It ended right before the 1970s. But these auto part cars, you have New York Central, Pennsy, D&H, DT&I, N&W, C&O. Interesting enough, C&O coming on Ann Arbor, 86-foot high cubes in the pool, tri-levels and bi-levels, open frame ones, and then the semi-enclosed ones, which is you had a lot of cheese. I mean, this is Wisconsin for crying out loud. So the cheese plants in Green Bay would haul cheese and reefers across the lake. You also had meat from the packing plants. You had Manawa butter. You had milk powder from A.R. Strum Company in the 60s and 70s. And this was a good chunk of traffic. You had canned goods coming from the Green Bay area in both 40 and 50 RBLs, but also 57-foot mech and plug-insulated box cars. GBW did not have their own insulated box cars, so you saw PFEs, SPFEs, and BNFEs. You'd have the clay cars, bentonite clay, which was used in the paper making process specifically in the Byron and Wisconsin Rapids paper mills. Sadly, that Wisconsin Rapids mill is just announced to be closing at the end of the month. 900 jobs, unfortunately. A lot of consolidated paper company out of Wisconsin Rapids. They use 70-ton minimum boxcar, but usually 100-ton boxcars. A lot of GBW boxcars for the coated paper rolls. And then Procter & Gamble mills out of Green Bay hold a lot of paper heading east on the boats. And Ripside and cylindrical hoppers. The cement hoppers were some of the heaviest cars on the boat. A lot of Ann Arbor, DT&I out of Dundee. You saw malt, soybeans, grain, oats that went to Manitowoc on CW, but interchanged at the yard in Green Bay. So you actually kind of had to head a little bit north, and then CW took them south. Another interesting, really interesting operation was the Green Bay Soap Company. Had their own tank cars. In fact, Athearn has made them, where you see Green Bay soap on them, and they would haul tallow, which was used in the soap making process, and then also covered hoppers of tankage, which is a nice name for ground up bone meal that was blown in. And then they also hauled cowhides, moved in the oldest box cars they could find. I can't imagine what those cowhide cars smelled like in the railroad car ferries. You had eastbound lumber from the BN, Milwaukee, and CB&Q heading all the way east on the Green Bay and Western across the state. They would be hauled on bulkhead flat cars, 40-foot box cars, 3 of those on any given center track with maybe a 50-foot car behind. So those took up a lot of space inside the boats. So I want to talk a little bit about modeling car ferry operations. So just another shot of the some of the models that I'm making. So on my layout, so I'm doing more of a proto freelance, if you will, on my layout. But the whole statement, if you will, is what if the car ferries never stopped running? I'm a young guy. I never really got to see the car ferries run. 37 years old. So I want the car ferries running now. I don't really my car ferries, but with modern equipment. So what I'm thinking is, what if the GBW never stopped running boat trains? GBW never got bought up by Wisconsin Central, but basically became a bridge line to the Wisconsin Central and Stevens Point, and then interchanged with the Wisconsin Southern Railroad. So basically, I get to run modern cars, whole bunch of awesome Elcos, a lot of awesome SD45s and SD40-2s. And scale trains, if you're listening, why not Wisconsin Central SD45s? Some of us are a little bit bummed. Reasons. For me, well, it's a very unique operation in history. It's a real niche in my local operation group. No one else is really doing car ferries. It's a way to preserve one of the most unique railroad histories in the Midwest. It's a combination of my favorite railroads and era and a believable concept, Wisconsin Central, Wisconsin Southern, GBW, and of course the boats. It's heavy prototype switching operations with lots of beyond the layout opportunities. It is a model railroader's dream as far as track plan and operations. And then it's an awesome project to explore 3D printing and provide models to others and increase interest in the car ferries. So on my layout, the boat-related traffic, I have other things going on my layout as well, but the things that really relate to the boats is I have 2 paper mills on my layout that take clay cars and push a lot of paper out. Of course, a whole lot of Wisconsin Central pulpwood flats, 3D printed. I have an auto plant run by Wisconsin Southern with MP15s, pretty cool. And they're taking a whole bunch of boat parts from the boats, car parts, sorry, from the boats. And then I'm also shifting modern auto racks to the boats and then coil steel loads as well for my stamping plant. I'm running fertilizer cars. They did run silica sand, so I can run some sand car type things and a lot of food products via online and offline customers. And then who can forget the cheese? So for me, in every given session, the GBW is going to run 2 boat trains. But instead of coming from Norwood, they're going to come from my WC yard, kind of like the quote-unquote Stevens Point. And then they're going to run to Kewaunee and back, just like they did. And just like you had those Ford Fast trying to get to Winona on time, my GBW trains will have to get to WC yard on time. And then Wisconsin Southern will run interchange trains to pick up the new cars from the Wisconsin Central. And then Wisconsin Central will do most of the switching on my layout, and they'll be bringing all the paper cars and everything to my different industries to the WC yard. And of course, GBW will pick that up from there. As far as the Kewaunee operations go, I'm going to have like a first mate / yard clerk. So I'm combining these 2 jobs. And so they're going to give instructions to my railroad crews, unloading and unloading the boats, which would be very helpful for first time boat ferry operations people that can just be instructed how to load them and why they load them that way, just to create some interest there, and a whole lot of things that you just never have to do in any other kind of operation. And they now have 2 boat train crews, but they're run independently of each other. They'll have to follow the instructions of the ferry mate and yard clerk, and then all my paperwork will be generated through JMRI, so I'll be doing the post-80s paperwork type process on my layout. So here's just a little video of my Kewaunee. So my Kewaunee Peninsula is actually prototypical. All the switches are in the right place. I did have to compress it slightly, which in HO scale is about a 3-foot compression. But the peninsula itself is 14 feet long. And I just shot a little bit of a video here to show you. So I've got a boat train coming out. To the left is track 8 and 9. You can see I have a train sitting there with unloaded cars from the car ferries already, with 2 RS-27s. And the interesting about this yard is you actually have this kind of bowl within a bowl. We have a bunch of Ys inside here, and I'm actually heading to track 4 now to pick up a mix of modern cars, so Wisconsin Central, GW, Wisconsin Southern running, if you will. So some high cubes. I'm running high cubes with paper products. Some of the boats did have car decks high enough to be able to take high cubes. The ballast cars are not going on the boat. So oftentimes you would, sometimes 6. A lot of these older boats were made for 40-foot cars, so they could haul 28 to 30 cars, but with modern cars, they can only do like 20 to 22, if you will. So as we're pulling this out to the right, you can see I've got 2 car decks sitting there. They're not full ferries yet. We're still working. But we got slip 1 right to the right of us with the black deck, and then we're going to be heading towards slip 2 here to drop off these cars. I used this. I can't mount them underneath by myself well. So since I have over 120 turnouts on my layout, it's easier to just put them on top for now. I can always move them. So as we come onto the car ferry, you can see this track gets very close to the water's edge. And there's actually a number 6Y on the apron itself. And so I've already loaded the wing tracks. You can see that I've got half of the center track. I got some coiled steel loads there, so it's not a full track at this point, and we're just backing in now. Out of laziness, I was just pushing it by hand. And as we pull out, you can see that I've got 2 gondolas that I've been using as idlers, and I'm just on top of one of my GBW engines with the camera. And as we pull out, I'm going to actually pull out on the rightmost track, which is the double slip track. And it's independent from the yard lead. So you can actually pull out differently if you will. You got to run around there between the slip track and then the yard leads. Here we pull out. Passing again the track to slip 1, and then you can see a yard lead. So I'm actually on a track right of the yard leads. Now I got crossover that's just in front of us to get in between both tracks. Basically, the guys I've talked to have operated the yard basically tell me, I can run exactly what they ran. So they'll tell me how they ran the trains. I can come down here and do it myself, which is a lot of fun. There we go. So just as a little plug, I work with the SS City of Milwaukee, which is the last railroad car ferry it's in preservation. It's basically as it was when it hauled cars, ending in 1981. But it definitely needs your help these days, especially with the coronavirus stuff. And I really encourage you to go see it in Manistee, Michigan. If you want to donate towards it, donate a gallon of paint. It's a huge project to keep it going. It's just an absolutely beautiful boat. It's open for tours. They have a boat tow. You can actually stay on the boat. Everything's original to the 1930s. Absolutely incredible. Here's a couple of shots I've taken on the boat itself. You can see the car deck as it was, pilot house. The lower right is the engine room, actually, where the boat was controlled from. You've got the Chadburn telegraph still there with all the levers to control steam engines. Just an absolutely beautiful treasure that still exists. So I just encourage you that if you want to learn more about car ferries, it's a wonderful way to be able to do it. Also, the SS Badger still runs to this day as well, and you can take that across the lake between Manitowoc and Ludington. So I don't know if there's any questions, but that kind of ends my PowerPoint presentation here. Carferry.com.
That was great. Thanks, Tim. So we do have some questions which we'll run through as the guys assemble for the roundtable that's coming next. But just Randy, if you could just mute for me, that would be great. Anyway, okay, Tim. So Randy, could you just mute for me while we just do the last connect? Thank you. Okay, so sorry about that, Tim. So the first question comes from Speed from outside of the Helix, and he asks, was there anything to prevent a car from rolling over the edge of the loading ramp when the ferry wasn't there?
No, I guess you could do that. So there was no protective gate, no bumper there. When the car ferry wasn't there, it was clear into the lake.
Wow.
I've never done that before.
Pete asked, no. Pete asked, was there a dedicated spacer car used when pushing the cars onto the apron? He noted one in the picture, and there was a loaded gun with what appeared to be weights. But was there a custom spacer car?
That was a good eye. So the Ann Arbor, the Grand Trunk, and the C&O did use dedicated spacer cars. A lot of them were just shop builds on the Michigan side, but the Greenman Western did not have idler cars. They just used empty cars, grabbed whatever they wanted, and went. So GBW never used dedicated idler cars, where other railroads did on the Michigan side. And we do have an old Ann Arbor idler car on the boat right now in Manistee, Michigan.
Wow. Norm Cattell asks two questions. The first one was, is there a car ferry modeling group that you're aware of?
No, actually, I'm not aware of one.
There you go, Norm. That's an opportunity.
I know a lot of guys who have modeled, but I think I'm one of the first to actually really 3D print in a serious way the car ferries. So a lot of guys have made them on styrene and balsa wood in the past. It's a lot of fine models out there.
I have a question on the 3D printing. Are you printing the whole thing in one piece, or is this in multiple pieces?
So right now I'm printing in 4 pieces, but I'm actually in the process of building a 3D printer that will have a 16-inch by 64-inch bed, which will allow me to print a car deck in one piece and the car walls in one piece. So that's where I'm headed. I have to break it in 4. And so I'm doing that basically a prototype. I haven't actually completed a full boat yet, but we're getting very close to having one fully done. And then I'm going to get the new printer going and we go to town. I've got a number of guys who have ordered them already.
We have a good guy in Australia who's good at printing big things. We can put you in touch with him.
That'd be great. I'd love to get a printer.
Okay, and then Norm's second question was, he's starting a layout based on Manitowoc in Wisconsin, and he wants to build a car ferry for his op sessions. Is there any suggestions on where to start? Because he's not found much on building a HO scale car ferry.
So he can definitely get in touch with me. I have a lot of resources that way. But actually, being that if he's in Manitowoc, the Manitowoc Maritime Museum has a lot of plans in that. But you definitely want to start with a set of blueprints. That's really key, depending on what boat he's planning on modeling. And then there are a lot of pictures out there if you kind of know the right people. But if he wants to try to get in touch with me, I'd be more than happy to get him into the right resources in that way.
We have a few questions about your layout. This is what happens when you show a video of your layout.
Yeah, it's as humble as it is right now.
It's great. I see great opportunities there for remote operations. So
we're doing it.
David Nicholson asks, what are the servo mounts you've used?
The 3D printed. I just whipped out a servo mount in like 15 minutes in Fusion 360. So it's just a quick 3D printed mount that I made myself with the calipers. Nothing special.
Well, 15 minutes is pretty special.
It's simple.
most people can't do that. Remember.
Well, when I'm doing counting rivets on a boat and making rivets in sea channel and stuff, making a server mount's pretty easy.
You have a mixed career in naval architecture.
Yeah,
Um, so this person is clearly from Wisconsin. This is their. I don't know their name, but I know the name of their YouTube account is Cheesehead Media,
Love it.
and they say, "Where did you get the XLSI ore cars for the Green Bay and Western used ballast?"
I made them. Those are 3D printed, and my clinic on Friday will show how I made them using a Cricut cutter and 3D printer. So my next 2 clinics show the process I do. But if they want to get a hold of me, I do have those available as a kit. So, but that's a 3D print project I did a couple years ago.
Awesome. And Andrew Porter, who'll be joining us in a wee while for the roundtable, asks, why did you mount your turnout motors on top of the layout?
Really hard to do it upside down by yourself. And my layout is kind of temporary. I get moved kind of quickly. So I don't really have a plan on scenicking this layout at this point. So I just want to get trains up and running, make it quick, be able to adjust things easily, and doing things over your head when you can't see what you're doing is for the birds. So that's why they're on top. I may paint them silver, but that's why they're on top. Just to
I see 3D printed things that go over them in your near future.
Yeah, it'd be a lot of 3D printed things. So I'd have to really be creative when you got like 7 of them in a row.
Suddenly, there's a lot of little huts appearing in that yard. A lot of storage required. There's a lot of
storage. Yeah, a couple porta potties too. I don't know.
I sent you some pictures of the docks in Orkney. There's lots of little huts there for the fishermen and all kinds of stuff, so you can get away with it. Not merely in the middle of a railroad yard, but hey ho, never mind. And so that was all of our questions. Tim, that I've got from while we were doing the session. If you've asked a question just then, I won't have caught it, but I'm sure Tim is back twice, I think, for 2 more clinics on Friday. So please tune in for those clinics. That was a really good introduction to Tim's fantastic modeling. So thank you so much for joining us, Tim. Thank you for sharing, and we'll see you again on Friday.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
decided to delay the start of the roundtable a few moments just to make sure that NMRX was running late so that we could resume business as usual and continue not running on time. So the panel tonight is assembled before us, a great group of guys. We've got Randy Hamill, they're our New Haven Railroad expert with the layout in the background, which is fantastic. We're also joined by Andrew Porter from Connecticut again this evening. We were joined by Andrew earlier, if you were watching the stream before the stream decided to die a little while ago, and we were talking about a few different topics just while we were trying to rectify the stream issues. But Andrew is back for the roundtable. And we're also joined by the president and CEO of the Cowcatcher Division, Division 1 of the Lone Star region, Chair Supremo and Maestro of the convention in Dallas-Fort Worth in 2023.
Keep it coming.
Yeah. And 3D printing salesman extraordinaire, Mr. Mike Mackey, Master Model Railroader, is joining us from Texas. So great chat tonight. We've had some great clinics already. Just had a great clinic there from Tim on car ferry operations. That was fantastic. A great, very knowledgeable guy. And we've had some great clinics so far. This is day 3. It already feels like a national convention. I didn't think this was going to feel like a national convention. I felt like it was going to feel like a total drain, but the comments and interactions, starting to see people, repeat people coming back each day that are taking time out of their schedules to take part. So I really appreciate that. Really appreciate the comments and feedback, and thanks to myself and the team. So tonight's topic is locomotives and rolling stock, deliberately broad. Same format as before. I have some pre-prepared questions for the guys. The guys have seen these questions beforehand, and then we're going to go over to Facebook, to the Facebook group where you guys have been posting. You've got probably about 5-10 minutes to share your locomotives or rolling stock onto the Facebook group, and then if we've got time at the end, we'll take questions to the panel from yourself, and Brad in Australia is going to be getting those questions and converting them so that the text is not upside down, so that we can understand them. Okay, so that's how it's all going to work tonight. Last night we mentioned sandpaper and abusing baseballs and cricket balls. Tonight we're going to try to stay away from sandpaper, just because Brad's controlling who's muted. So that's why. Okay, so. All joking apart, our first question for the panel, and we're going to go Randy, Andy, and then Mike. That's a bit cool, like Randy, Andy. But anyway, we'll go Randy, Andy, Mike. The question 1 is steam or diesel?
Steam or diesel? I'd say both. The transition era, I think, is still very popular, specifically because of the opportunity to model both, depending on what you're modeling and all. You've got a lot of opportunities. In my case, modeling the New Haven, I'm modeling a period from 1946 to 54, which is the same period when they completely dieselized in this particular section of the railroad. So I would actually have to go back to 1945 to be all steam. By 46, you're starting to see S1s come in on some of the local freights, and Cs and RS3s. So I love doing both. My initial plan was not to do steam because I couldn't afford to do New Haven steam. Well, this one doesn't look too bad, and it starts to grow after a while. So I've got pretty much all the steam that I would need at this point.
Let's go.
As I kind of talked about before, I do a little bit of mix of both. Narrow gauge, I don't have any any diesels. I don't really plan on getting any. I'm a narrow gauge modeler and a standard gauge modeler, and I'm modeling 2 completely separate parts of the country. And steam, of course, I'm a B&M modeler, so steam is important to me. I'm fortunate as a B&M modeler that I have brass locomotives. If I was a strictly main central modeler, I have nothing. So yeah, it's a little rough. Yeah.
Cool. And Mike?
I worked with a young lady who went shopping a lot, and her motto was one of each. She didn't like to make decisions. So I'm gonna chime in with the same guys here, that I don't see any reason why you can't have both if that's what you enjoy doing. I would say this: be true to a be true to a time frame. I have seen a lot of model railroaders get lost and economically lost, okay, by wanting to have one of each, okay, and that there is a pitfall there. But you don't have to have either diesel or steam and make a selection if that's what you want to do. The transition era is a lot of interesting opportunities there. When I first started modeling, I am a former 1-to-1 scale railroader and worked for the Cotton Belt in the Southern Pacific. And so I modeled the time frame when I worked because it was easy for me to call on that from a scenery, a weathering standpoint, all that kind of stuff. I have now transitioned a little bit back to the transition era. And so now I've got some diesel and some steam on there. Yeah. You like that? That little pun there?
I thought you would have transitioned forward to the transition era. Or was it not?
Easy, buddy. Easy, buddy. Easy. Okay. I was born at night. It just wasn't last night. Okay.
One other thing to mention, since it seems like we're all in the transition era, if you are modeling more modern eras and you do want to do steam, there's still opportunities to do that. If you want to stay more prototypical, you can do, there's the things running out on the UP and Norfolk and Western. There's other tourist lines and things of that nature. So you don't necessarily have to stick with the transition era if you want to do both. But there are, maybe fewer opportunities. But if you're freelancing or building your own thing, then you can come up with pretty much any good reason why you would have some of both.
No problem. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So I was the point I was just going to make as my point is that I like steam and diesel. I think the challenge is that there is less steam locomotives that are accurate being produced. Manufacturers are going for very prototypical diesels. A lot of the people at the moment, the second generation diesels, not necessarily the modern ones, but there are a lot of modern, right up to date models coming out recently. I think you've got to pick your era. What I like to model is Wisconsin and modern era Wisconsin, CN in Wisconsin, ex-Wisconsin, SD, all sorts, SD40s, SD60s, SD70s, SD everything. So running through, you've got through power on that line and stuff like that. But I also model the Wisconsin Southern, and and even very recently, not necessarily in 2020, they've allowed steam excursions to run over their mainline trackage. So there are opportunities there. I would just say you can do anything you want. It's your railroad, ultimately, number one. But number two, if you want to be a prototypical railroad, then you've got to have a reason for what's on your layout to be there. So,
and of course to sum that up, if you've got enough money, get them all. It's okay.
We don't all live in Texas.
eBay is dangerous.
Yes,
I've got that oil well in my backyard pumping right now, Gordy. Okay.
I'll have to add another title to your introduction.
There you go.
Okay.
Right.
So the next question then to the team, and anyone can pick this up, raise your hands, pick it up, is what do you think is the most important improvement or check everyone should do to ensure the smooth running of their locomotives and rolling stock? Andy?
Wheel set gauge. I cannot tell you the number of times I have pulled a piece of rolling stock or a locomotive out of the box and had an out of gauge wheel set. Even brand new RTR stuff, just a little bit can cause innumerable problems, from derailing when you go through a frog, and that kind of that NMRA gauge is probably your most useful tool. It's probably something I should have mentioned last night, but your NMRA gauge is probably the most useful tool when it comes to your locomotives and rolling stock. You need to check everything. And it'll seem insane doing it over and over again, but I'm the type of guy who will go and I go to a train show. I pick up a brand new in box Proto 2000 SD7 or 9 in chassis system because of cats, and I take it home and I completely take it apart, all the way down to the wheel sets and individual component pieces, and I check the wheel gauge on each wheel, and I remove all that peanut butter off the gears and go build it back from the beginning. So
And Andy, where exactly does somebody get one of these wheel gauges?
The NMRA website, this NMRA company store, is a good place to look. If you have a local hobby shop, every local hobby shop that I've ever walked into has had one at least NMRA gauge, and I own 3 because I keep losing them. So I end up just buying another one because I get tired of looking for it, and then I find it, so then I have another one, and then I lose 2, and now I go buy another one, and I have 3. So, yeah.
Well, I model N scale. It's easy to lose them.
Yes, yes, it is. I have one of those. It's tiny.
Yes. Okay, who wants to take that question next?
Go ahead, Randy.
Randy, we'll go to Randy, and then we'll go to Mike.
Yep, I'm much more of a put it on the track and fix problems that occur rather than checking everything right now. But I'm also typically involved in a lot of different projects. So lately, I've got about an extra year before the next New England prototype meet, which I usually have my layout open for tours and op sessions. I'm working on doing a lot of work to get it, ringing decoders and all that sort of stuff. So now that I'm doing the decoders, I'm actually doing the same sort of stuff, is that when possible, I know splices inside, if I can avoid it, to keep it as clean and easy as possible, because then there's just fewer points of failure. But then other times I get lazy and I'll just do whatever I have to get it up and running. So it kind of depends on the mood. But yeah, I think it's, once you've been working with your layout a long time, and I guess in my case, I did the same sort of thing, but with the track. My track has been in place, although it hasn't all been attached, because since I use microengineering, it can hold its shape and stuff. So we've done lots and lots of testing and operating sessions as is, and tweaked things as we find them, whether it's track, wheel sets, locomotive problems, and so on. So I think it depends a little bit on your personality and all, but there's so many things to work on. And I've just started saying, you know what, instead of fighting my kind of inner nature, I'll pick up something and work on it. And then when something else grabs my attention, I'll work on that. They'll all get done eventually. So I'm slowly working my way through the locomotives, and eventually I'll get the wheel sets on the freight cars. So
cool. And Mike?
I find that both of you guys touched on something that I have found through trial and error is very important, and that's track. Now, I realize we're talking about locomotives and rolling stock here, but if your track's not right, it's not going to stay on there either. Okay, mm-hmm. So I think the two are meshed together. And while Andy is talking about doing the gauges, which the wheel gauge, which is absolutely fundamental for rolling stock as well as locomotives and power equipment, your track has got to be right. If you've got gaps in the rail, if you've got frogs that aren't right, if you've got points that aren't nestled into the side rails right, whenever you throw a turnout, all of those things are going to count for derailments. And to me, one of the biggest things that causes people to leave this hobby is ill rolling or ill operating equipment that mm-hmm. they can't have fun with because it's constantly giving them problems. And if you can fundamentally get down to good track, good wheel sets, good locomotives, and this is one more thing here. Give me just a little bit of latitude here, Gordy. But the cheap locomotives, stay away from cheap, nasty, old, secondhand locomotives unless you're going to put them in a roundhouse in a scene and set them on a backtrack somewhere. Okay, go ahead, spend a little bit more money in scale, get you a good Kato locomotive or one of the same type brands. Go ahead and spend a little bit money and get a Genesis, an Athearn Genesis, or a Proto 2000 locomotive, and or Broadway Limited or whatever the thing is. But the cheap ones that you can get at literally the dime store, stay away from it. Save your money. Don't go down that path. And that's just a good fundamental for me. So.
Okay, so the only final thought from me on that didn't really get touched on is couplings, and
Yep.
so there are many different types of couplings around the world. Let's just focus on North American types for now. So the good old knuckle coupling, and I think the one most important thing you can do to make your locomotive and rolling stock run better is to have conformity. And
Mhm.
so coupler height is one issue, but let's just look at the KD couplers for a minute. And I'm not picking on KD; it's just the most popular brand. KD has multiple different sizes of knuckle size,
Yep.
and you need to make sure that if you're running scales, which I think is 158s in HO, I'm an N scaler, so I may have got that wrong.
Oh, that's right.
Then it's got to be, they've all got to be 158s. And if you're running number fives, they should all be number fives because that will ensure smooth, issue-free operation. And as Mike was trying to indicate, coupler height gauge is after wheel gauge, coupler height gauge. These are tools that everybody should have. And another tool that's really good from KD is the trip pin bending tool. Really, really important because just today I was testing out the layout that we've just laid the track on my new layout, first deck of my layout, and I ran a loco on that layout that I won't be running. It was a Scale Trains Gevo, and the air hose caught on part of the rail as it went around a corner. Now I don't have an issue because that Gevo will never run on that part of my layout because it's part of a switching part of my layout that's run by the Wisconsin Southern, and currently CN doesn't lease them Gevos to play with, so it won't run around that very tight radius that I tried to run it around. So rule 1, read the manufacturer's recommended radiuses. Rule 2, check conformity and make sure everything is all running on the same stuff.
Yeah, I prefer the,
So we'll go to
the trip pin clip pliers because I just cut them off.
Gandry.
So I'd like to, first I want to tell you about the Church of Sergeant Couplers.
They're awesome.
Oh no.
And I told all of them to Dale Kritsky.
Yeah, no, I know Dale. Dale and my wife actually went to high school together, so I know Dale, and this is his fault that I switched it. So I would just wanted to circle back to what Mike was talking about with the track, and you can actually get away with 2 out of 3 of those wheels, locomotives, and track. You can have absolutely the worst track in the world, but you have to go really slowly. And if you've seen Dale's layout,
yes,
the track is terrible, but it's amazing at the same time. It's beautiful. It's just if you go over 5 miles an hour on that railroad, 5 scale miles an hour, you're on the ground.
Yep.
No doubt about it. But I absolutely love Sergeant Couplers, and that's one of the. I mean, I guess that's kind of a good lead in right into the next question. There, right? The accurate modeling of the prototype.
It is. It was a great segue. I give you points for that. But Mike was just holding up the famous trip pin bender, which is great. Bends in multiple scales, and good for curling your eyelashes there, Mike, as well.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so that does a good lead into the next question. Next question is, what advice would you give to somebody who wants to make their models more accurately reflect a given prototype? Andy, we'll go to you because you'd already started this.
Yeah, so there's the right couplers for your model. That's important. Not having if you go to Sargent's, there are different couplers available, and there's a Facebook group for that. The other very important thing is photos. If at all possible, find photos of the prototype you're modeling. And I'm just gonna quickly so there's good books out there. And by the way, Gordy, you should see if you can get him to do a clinic or 3.
Volume 1.
Oh, sorry, that's not the guy's name. Ted Koa.
Okay, Ted Koa.
Yeah,
okay.
Sorry, that's volume 1. That's not the clinic. So photos of the freight cars in the time period you model, and I'll go ahead and just give a little push for the Inter Murray store again.
Yeah.
He wrote this book along with Larry Klein, but there's photos in this book of freight cars, in the post-war time period. These are all taken in one location over a span of a year or so. So you kind of get another thing there. And then, finding out what if you can get a hold of the NMRA and get them to get you a copy of the official railway equipment register. I've got one from 1943, but you can open it up and find out, the dimensions of a car. That's in here. It gives you the car dimensions. It gives you the car numbers. It gives you the reporting marks. It gives you, a basic description, a kind of a basic description of the car. So you can go and look at that model and go, well, did that exist, on the shelf? And that's another thing to look at it too, is the reporting marks and the build dates and the rebuild dates that are stamped on the side of the car.
Mm-hmm.
These are all things Pennsylvania Railroad Modeler. I'm sorry to tell you that.
Yep. Yeah, I think research is the big thing. Photos was going to be my number one answer there. And my copy of the post-war freight car fleet, I've got Post-it notes on pretty much every picture telling me which models represent those cars that are available, whether they're resin kits or even kit bash things, just so that it gives me some idea, because that's right in the middle of my modeling era as well. So that 1947 fleet is fantastic. And Ted, he's the owner of Speedwitch Media, is the name of his company, and he's got a series of books available, as well as the railway prototype cyclopedias. Yep, those are some of his railway prototype cyclopedias.
And, Andy, he's going to be paying you commission, man. I'm telling you.
Yeah. No, well, Ted is from this area as well, so we know him well. But photographs are kind of the key to, I think, and a little bit about how they're constructed. In addition to the other things that he mentioned, car builder cyclopedias, you can find them online for 1922 and earlier. Otherwise, you can also find the old train shed cyclopedias that were made from copies of those, and those you can get pretty cheap, which are pages from those. And those kind of have the plans and stuff. Of course, old model railroaders, RMCs, all of the magazines. Mainline Modeler was well known for publishing plans and learning how to use those plans. Ted Collada actually did an awesome clinic where he would take a plan and print it out in HO scale. And if you wanted to scratch build that, you can do it using clear styrene. So you can do it right on top of the plan itself. Some real neat approaches that way. But to me, it's also a matter of, you kind of have to feel out and figure out what your level of, to me, it's accuracy and fidelity are. Accuracy is whether the parts on the car are correct. So does it have the right, if it's a box car, say, does it have the right ends, the right roof, the right doors, that sort of thing. If it's a single sheath car, is the bracing the correct pattern and direction? Fidelity would be more things like how fine the detail is. Is it separately applied parts versus molded on parts? And I got back in the hobby, well, now it's been about a decade, I guess, a little longer. But at that point, I didn't really have anything usable from my childhood days. So I made the decision that everything was going to have separately applied parts. So I was only purchasing things that had those, and there's which different ends are. There's a lot of modeler names as well as the prototypical names, and I'm the one of those types that likes to know what they were actually called and prefer to use those terms. But the reality is, it's just a matter of communicating between modelers and figuring out, okay, what do I need for this car if I want to model this, and finding those details, and then just experimenting and working on your skills. A lot of my projects are not completed the first time around because I get to a point where I don't know how I'm going to go further. And then I set it aside and work on something else. And eventually I'll go, oh, I know how to do that. Or I'll develop a skill or find
30 seconds, because then we're going to have to go to Facebook. Do you got anything to add to that question?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm modeling one of the big things for locomotives, prototypical handrail size. A lot of times the ones that are molded or that come with the kit are way out of scale.
Mm-hmm.
And to tack on one final thing to what Randy's saying, the achievement program will make you a mammothly better, if that's the right word, modeler. It's going to let you learn skills and do things to Randy's point. I didn't know how to do that. Now I do, and go back and finish it using different things like that. We're doing a clinic in our division that we're teaching people how to scratch build flat cars. So it comes right back to what Randy's talking about. The under the piping, the queen posts, the center sills, all of the things, and what those pieces mean and how they do it, and it's helping them achieve their cars for the AP program. So get involved.
So that's great, guys. So that wraps up the questions. I just had some final points to put on there. I feel like I'm shaking my finger at you all now. Sorry about that. And that was that it's great to talk about photographs and stuff like that. But if you were coming from my perspective, because I have done my CARS AP certificate, I was like, that's great. I can do technical drawing and I can read a technical drawing, but how do I actually build this thing? So there are some great resources here. This is one from Model Railroad. Okay, it's a bit old. You can still pick these up on eBay. You'll see them around and in various places. If you go on Amazon, secondhand books sellers on Amazon sell these. This was printed quite a while ago. These are great because they actually have tips and tricks and show you the old ways of doing things. You generally have a photograph and you also have the drawing, so you can compare one to the other. So really good tools. The other thing I would say is that there are some kits around there and out there that you can do. Now, back in the day, we didn't really have ready to run. When we said ready to run, it was an Affirm Blue box or a Roundhouse box, and you had to do some of the construction yourself. And you had molded on, but you had molded on detail parts and stuff like that. Now, here's two examples I just grabbed from a pile of stuff that I'm actually sending to Jordan Cosmo Kramer in Ohio path, and this one isn't going. So this is going spare in Orkney if anyone needs it in Orkney. But here's a kit that Central Valley do, more famously known for their bridges. But this is a kit with Northern Pacific flat car. You have a photograph of it there. What's really cool about this kit is it's buy one get one free, because there's two flat cars in there, so you can screw one up and you've still got a spare, which is really useful for AP. And then Tichy Group do kits still as well. Now the key thing with the Tichy Group is this is just advertised as a 40-foot 50-ton flat car. It's not necessarily specifically to any particular prototype. So it probably is to a specific prototype, or just a close enough. And so you would need to modify this to be matching your prototype. But of course, if you do an AP, modifications and details mean points mean prizes. So all really good thing to do. Same with this MP flat car. One of the things you can do with this is all molded in plastic, including the deck. It wouldn't be too difficult to replace that with a wooden deck that you've made yourself, either from scribed sheet wood material, or actually individual board by board. Board by board, more work, more points. So that was the end of that. I just wanted to bring that back there for everybody.
Gordy,
Yes.
You were referring to a Amazon? I don't know. We don't have that over here in Texas. We have Amazon. Okay.
Amazon.
I'm not sure what you got. I don't know what you have. Yeah, thank you.
For things like learning how to scratch build freight cars and all, Mainline Modeler was a magazine that had loads of information and projects on building freight cars, scratch building them, and the entire collection's available on DVD from the CNO Historical Society.
Yeah, and I also know that, I don't know what the name of the magazine is, but I know if you go to trainlife.com, which is the store for Exact Rail, they do have some old 1909 something from the last century of PDFs that are available to people for free download of different magazines, which will have drawings and all this kind of good techniques. Because the techniques are not really. There are articles. If you get the NMRA, if you become an NMRA member and you take the NMRA magazine, there's lots of articles with these kind of skills in. But other than really railroad model craftsmen, these skills have started not to be published as much as they were in the past. Certainly not in the detail of the articles that were there in the past. So use some old resources. The stuff doesn't get old. But let's go to Facebook. Again, I apologize that you're seeing my own personal Facebook here, so you'll be seeing a few different things. So our post today was locomotives and rolling stock. First one up here. Hopefully this isn't going to go too slow. Why is this maybe painful? Our first post here was from Pam. and Pam provided a photograph of her favorite locomotive on her father's layout. It's a HO scale L&N K5. It was crafted from an AHM Pacific, so it's been modified, and there's some custom work been done there to make that a more realistic model from something that was partway there. So kind of ties nicely to what we were just talking about.
It's beautiful.
It's a great looking model.
Nicely
I don't know
done. Nicely done.
I don't know how long ago that's been done, but that's there. Mark there posted a link. We're not going to go to his website there because it will kill my computer. But how to improve a roundhouse kit, that'll be good. Andy posted this. I didn't know that German ice trains ran on the Northeast Corridor, but maybe Randy does.
I'm not sure I've seen one, but they very well could have. That's past my modeling era, so it's well past my expertise.
That would be interesting. I suppose that would be pre Alicia, or however the heck you say that in Texas. Acela, whatever it is, Alicia, Acela, whatever, I can't say it.
So,
and then another one from Andy. Listen, guys, the caption thing for Facebook, when you say Gordy, it comes up Courtney. So, like, names are not our strong point here at NMREX. Just look at the pictures. It's fine. So this is F69 PHAC, which was used to haul the ice train on its tour. So Andy's doing 2 locomotives here. And it looks like that's converted from a model using 3D parts. Great. That's a big advantage of 3D printing now. Good looking model. Okay, one from Matt. So Matt's going to be looking at Matt's painting techniques. Matt's going to be doing a clinic on painting and weathering later in the week. But there's Tashendo SD24 that he's painted and lettered for his custom road. Looking good.
Crisp lettering, good detail on the decals too. How he's got them snuggled in there really well.
He makes his own decals as well, or decals if you're not in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
It's a
I give up.
That's a GK E60CF. I have no idea what that is, but that was cool.
They didn't run those in Texas. I'm just telling you. Okay.
Well, that's this is the next one is a Athearn Blue Box Jeep 9. This is looking better than most Athearn Blue Box Jeep 9s I've seen. Looking good. Nice job. Nice job. Love that contrast paint. You'll have to look out for Matt's clinic on that later in the week. We'll skip one of Matt's just for time. We'll go to something that was quite interesting. Oh, the good old Labelle. This is a kit bashed Labelle motor car kit. O scale by the looks of things. Free rail there.
That's a tight radius curve right there, I'm telling you.
Mm-hmm.
It's a trolley layout, Mike. Some places outside of Texas are spatially challenged.
Definitely.
But there was the roof or the roof.
And Randy's going to get something. I saw him. He snuck away for
a minute. We'll be back in a second on that. This is great. Really good work there.
You know what? That could be close to Texas because I've got that same mill on my layout right there in the background.
Okay, Ken Mason. Happy accident with weathering. Yeah.
Ken is in New Orleans and he's a Lone Star region guy. He's also the division director down there, and the Crescent Lines is their lines for their model railroad club in New Orleans. Crescent City, Crescent Lines. Now you understand.
That's cool. I like the weathering. It looks like that loco's been through the wars.
A lot of salt water in New Orleans, salt spray and stuff down there. Humidity, rust.
Yeah, come to Orkney, we'll tell you about the rust.
Boy,
like Matt's improving. We're talking about improving older models. There's Matt's clinic tonight on Athens Blue Box and doing rebuilds and improvement on them. Definitely don't miss that. Mike Slater, who is a trolley modeler, has some of his.
He looks like he's got some derailment problems on that one.
I'm seeing an absence of rails there, but I'm seeing quite a lot of really good work. It's good stuff. It looks like we're seeing a load of trolleys. Interurban cars. This quite the fleet, Mike.
Yeah.
Quite the fleet. We'll skip over. We'll keep going. There's even more, and then not a trolley. This looks interesting. Interesting to know where that came from. It looks quite old. Okay, and fellow modeler in Scotland. There are some of us. That's a Spectrum, Bachmann Spectrum 280 that's been modified. And I know what Patrick models. So we're gonna go to Sweden. So Patrick also models Sweden. So going to get to look at some European prototypes, and you'll see the buffers. Huge difference. It tells you that this is not North America. Buffers on the ends of the rolling stock. You can see the very.
Educate me, Gordon. What's the purpose of that?
Okay, so the purpose of buffers is because they're the points of contact between pieces of rolling stock. So
Right.
yes, you see the knuckle coupler there, but in Europe you don't have knuckle couplers. We have a chain or a screw link, which is two look like shackles with a screw between to tighten them up to put the rolling stock together. And the purpose of the buffers was as you go around corners, they actually are sprung, and they'll stop. They'll keep
your
the
spacing right. Keeps your spacing right.
Yeah, and you with screw link couplings, you don't get any slack action, or very little slack action. And so there's different types of couplings in Europe. Some were changed after a lot of standardization in Europe occurred in World War One because of the fact that certain countries overran other countries, and certain countries such as the United Kingdom and America and Canada sent rolling stock to France. And so the French had to come up with a standard. The French standard before World War One was actually 2 hooks and chains, wing hooks and chains, and the center chain. So you had 3 chains on it on a piece of rolling stock, and that was just too much hassle. During World War One, you wanted to get things moved quick. You're under fire, so the Railway Museum at Bowness, West Lothian, you'll see there's a locomotive there that's got that French system on it from World War One. But that's the purpose of those, Mike, is to the contents of the car as well. So see some nice stuff there. Thank you for sharing, Patrick. RS3s, excellent. So there's some more RS3s. Louisville, Nashville. Very nice. Keep going with these. Got quite a few today. It's becoming more popular, but I think a lot of this is Pam spamming us, but it's fine. Back to Steam from Pam again. And we're there you go, Perry Simpson's. Look. And just I think guys, with everything, nothing there really looks the same. So good work. Of course, as Mike will tell you, being a real railroader, no 2 locomotives look the same. Weather the same. This is cool. This is from David Hager. For you to show him how to paint this one. So very nice work. And what's this? This looks like an NMRA car. Western Fun in '81. Wow. Where was this convention? San Mateo, California. And all the regions are there. Even the British region. Look at that. Above the sunshine. That's unusual. British and sunshine. It's not two words that generally go together. But yeah, great.
Yeah.
Great work. So we'll stop sharing. We're at 45 past the hour. Brad, if you want to come back into the studio, do we have questions from anyone for the panel?
Not really, but I'll run through a couple of things there. First off, there was a comment there that the German ICE and the Swiss X2 were tested on the Northeast Corridor. So that's some pretty cool information for you, Gordy.
Yeah, cool.
Brian made a comment there also that he is interested in doing his golden spike. So that's rolling stock and locomotives
So,
are
yeah,
part of that. That's
yes.
pretty cool.
So let's hang on that for a second. So golden spike, yeah. So the golden spike's a great opportunity if your region does it and your division does it, and you're able to show your stuff. It's a great introduction to the AP program because you don't have to merit on anything that you do. It's more about getting into the process of showing your models. And I think, and showing your models and talking about your models and getting feedback, that's the kind of entry level for Golden Spike. That's what it's all about. It was a program that was brought in with the help of a British region member, Steve Park, who's also a master model railroader, to help people get into the AP program without having to jump at doing a certificate first. It's great. I know a lot of people have done it. And yeah, you do display 3 pieces of rolling stock is my recollection. Mike, have I got that wrong?
That's correct. You got to display some rolling stock, just basically put your layout out there for people to be able to see. You should have some ballasted track. You have to have certain types of trackage, like a siding. There are some specifics there, but something that is normally done on just about every first layout. So one thing I do want to caution you, if you achieve your MMR, you are no longer eligible to receive the golden spike. So always get your golden spike before you turn in your last certificate for your MMR.
Cool. A few other things that were on there. Pete Hall says, I used to hook up a chain on the Bluebell Railway with a long pole. You need to swing it just right to hook it up. So that's the different types of couplers around the world.
Yeah. You don't want to get these anywhere near a chain and a hook. Definitely not.
No,
so they used to use a 6-foot pole to lift the hook on, which is very similar to what you'll see British people do on their layouts. So
exactly, I've seen a few of those over here. Maurice, this is for you, Gordy. Actually, those kits you showed, Maurice.
I'm not aware of any right offhand. I'm not big on the N-scale world, but I don't know of a whole lot of kits in N-scale.
When I was 11, I put together an N-scale boxcar kit. It was like a 36-foot boxcar, and I don't remember the name of the manufacturer. I'm sure it's around here somewhere.
So MTL, which is Microtrains, used to do N-scale kits. Certainly, there are some available. North American, not so much. But if you want to have a go at building a kit and you want to go further afield, then there are 2 options that I can think of straight off the top of my head. One is there are kits on shapeways for rolling stock in N-scale. 2, so you can have a go at a 3D printed kit and add some details to it. The second thing is that if you go to British outline stuff and European outline stuff, there are thousands of rolling stock kits in N-scale in British stuff. There's a society called the 2 Mill Society who are like Proto 87, Proto 48 in North American for N-scale in the UK. They produce kits. They produce kits in brass. They produce kits in plastic, resin, even white metal kits in the UK in N-scale. So it's a bit difficult. I know there's a lot, but Mike may know of one.
Well, one of the things that I mentioned previously, we're doing a scratch building seminar, and we're doing it in all scales. We've got modelers in N-scale, HO, S, HON3, O scale. And if you're out there and you want to do this, don't let the term scratch building scare you. Okay. But you can buy those parts in frames from Micro Trains.
Okay,
Go from there.
There is an N scale kit manufacturer. I'm going to go to their website.
Okay.
I remembered what they were called. I should have known. I'm a bit of a. It's late. If you go to nscalekits.com, these kits were produced by N scale, mostly modern, but you've got well cars, double stack cars, Universal Railroad of the World, some Pensy stuff. So there's lots and lots of stuff there. Go to that website. It's nscalekits.com. There's some great kits there.
I do know there was a resin kit of a Canadian 8-hatch reefer as well, an N scale. I don't remember the company that produced it though.
But I think that's the biggest selection of N scale kits that I've found, and yeah, I mean the problem with doing an N scale well car, I have a few of those kits. Is just the sheer number of with the kit, and yeah, it's terrifying. It's N scale decals.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
In the UK, transfers.
There's a language barrier there, Gordy.
Okay.
One of the things that you on that slide, that image you brought up there of that website was Trinity Industries cars. I just want to let you guys know that if you come to the 2023 convention in Dallas Fort Worth, we've got a tour set up for the Trinity Industries railcar plant, so that you can come and see how they're built firsthand. I'm still working on all the details, but my sister-in-law is the HR director for that plant. So,
and Mike, what are the dates for that convention?
August of 2023. We're still trying to get everything pinned down, and but I think it's the third weekend in August of 2023. So bring your personal air conditioner with you when you come to Texas, and joined together by a sky bridge. So once you get here, you're going to be steps away from an air conditioned motor coach.
Enough. Yeah. Stop. Enough. Stop. Cutting you off. Brad, was there anything else on the stream?
That's pretty much it, Gordy.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for those that posted their photographs and stuff. Tomorrow, I've said it 1,000 times, but I'm going to say it one more time. It's Wednesday. It's Wednesday of National Convention, and that means it's LD SIG Day. We'll have some great layouts, some great clinics on layout design and operations tomorrow. Roundtable tomorrow is on layout design and operations. Don't forget the operations part. Gordy is doing a clinic if he ever gets it finished, but certain problems keep getting in his way. But I am doing a clinic tomorrow on how I used track charts and track maps, some hand-drawn, some actual from the railroad, to design my railroad here in Orkney, which is based on the Wisconsin Southern over in the States. So really interesting. There's no excuse after you've seen my clinic not to model prototypically your favorite railroad, even if it's across an ocean. So thank you to the panel for tonight. A different panel will assemble tomorrow, same time, same place. Enjoy the rest of the clinics tonight, and we'll be back later.
I believe we're live again. Welcome. This is Speed, not at the bottom of the helix, but at the bottom of the ramp. I believe we tripped over the Ethernet cable, so the helix is a little bit under construction right now. Our next presenter is the AP chair in Queensland, Australia, prolific scratch and prototype builder, another rail railroader since he worked for the Queensland Rail, and probably the only MMR to model a non-US railroad. We say welcome to Mr. Arthur Hayes.
Good morning from Australia, or g'day, around what I said in the program, flat cars, but you won't be disappointed, there are plenty of flat cars in it. Just to let you know where I am, I'm in Brisbane, Queensland, about 500 miles north of Sydney. My layout is modelled on Queensland Railways. It's HON 42. It's a 3'6" system, which is the state government railway that runs some 5,000 miles across Queensland. We've also got about 100 miles of standard gauge coming in from the southern states, which links us to the rest of the world. So I guess we can start with a question: why add loads to your wagons? Well, it's what the prototype does. They move freight around the network. You know, in the early days, it was sort of to open up the country. Most were common carriers, so they had a right to carry everything, where today it's more about earning money. So it makes it look real. It also changes your wagon. We buy a lot of ready-to-run rolling stock these days, and we don't want everybody having the same. So by adding a load, you can change your wagons around. If you've got industry on your layout, it sets the scene. It shows what's going into those sidings. It can be used to add weight to your wagons, or in some cases, I've got resin kits that have got a bow in them. I put a nice lump of brass down the middle of them, and I build a load around it to hide it, so you can keeps your wagon straight. Plus, it's your personal thing, your stamp. You've made that wagon unique to you. Plus, when other guys come around, it's always a talking point. And they're not big projects. You can do them in 2 or 3 nights or something like that. Depending on what it is, you might get away with it with one night. Yep, adding weight can save you a little bit of pain, just as these guys found out in the real prototype. If you're modelling an era, you need to have a bit of a look around, because over the years, loads did change, and you know, you only just got to look at the world that we live in, how quick it changes. Well, it did the same on the prototype. You know, I worked at a place where my first stint, it was a general freight place. It was a common carrier with private sidings. I went back a few years later, and a transport company had moved in, and it was a whole new ball game. So things do change over time, and likewise with private sidings. One era it may be making wagons, and then a few years back it could be a steel plant or something. If you're motor vehicles, just watch your era and model. If you're model in the 60s, you don't want a 2010 model car getting around on your rolling stock. Also look at your trains around your local area. We find this one here, the train heading towards the top of the picture. You can sort of see that it's all the wagons are loaded. Pipes, floodstone, tarpaulins. Yet the train coming towards the bottom of the picture is empty wagons. The wagon with drums just in the picture shows them on their side, which is an indicator that they're empty. So have a look at your trains, because you might find trains going one way are very different to the trains going the other way. So what I'm going to have a look at a little bit is about rail networks, safety management system, the correct wagon and how they used to get them, freight distribution, trains forces, marshalling, securing equipment, loads, and if I don't run out of time, we'll look at some special loads. Okay, every railroad has a structure gauge. It talks about where your buildings can be from your track centre. Last thing you want is do a building and the train go past and wipe it out. So there's a structure gauge, and tunnels, buildings, bridges, and then another thing is track centres. How far apart are your track centres? All plays a part on what goes on a wagon. If you have a look at the older branch lines, compare it to the newer lines, you'll probably find things on the newer line have wider gauges than those on the old branch lines. There's a rolling stock gauge. Depending on where it is, our local railway has 4 different classifications of rolling stock. So some of it can only run in certain areas. And then we have a look, there are what we call a loading gauge. The ARTC one is standard gauge. QR is the local 3'6" system. And this was what they call a loose load. The caption on the internet showed it as a load of wheat. Well, if that was a wagon, a load of wheat, I don't think that wagon would be on its wheels. It'd be snapped in half. Looking at it from my point of view, I believe it's a wagon of chaff or something like that, stock feed. Even in containers in this modern railway, anything on a flat rack is considered a loose load where it's secured to another means. Nested flat racks, once again, it's a loose load. So there's restrictions. It doesn't follow the container loading gauge, which is a little bit different, or they call it the fixed loading gauge. Once again, ARTC is the line south of Brisbane, QR is the line north of Brisbane. So it just gives you some idea the different types of loading gauges. The higher the deck of your wagon, it restricts the height of the container you can put on it. Often, and you'll find in some of these documents, you'll get maps that outline what type of container can go where. And if you have a look at the QR one, there's 4 different types of containers there, from 8'6" right through to 10-foot containers. So here we have a fixed load, and the fixed load it's a fixed object sitting in a fixed position on the wagon. Like those 20-foot boxes can't go anywhere else but sit in those positions. When we get into the fixed loading gauge, you'll find clearances in certain parts is not all that great. So if you get a container that's not quite loaded properly, you've got a situation like this where you could easily do damage. And if you do get it wrong, well, you do a lot of damage. They're pretty easily, but getting it out wouldn't be too much fun. When we loaded wagons or cars or trucks or whatever you might want to call them, the consignor would bring your local station master and give him a few details. And the station master, he'd have a look around and he'd sort of say, well, what size is this load? What mass is it? What classification? It will be the track that it's going to run over because, okay, for us here, for example, we've got 10, 12 and a half, 15, 20, 25, 28 ton axle loads. So, you need to know where the wagon's going. Then you'd have a look around, see if the wagon was on hand. If as much as possible, you'd try to use a wagon that was in the yard that come in the previous day. So if not, you'd have to order it. And if it was a special load or something that wasn't out of the box, something that you didn't do all the time, you'd seek assistance, get somebody from special loads. So getting that wagon, it was usually an 8 a.m. wagon report, and you told the head office what was in the yard. And if you wanted a wagon, well, you'd order it, and then you'd have a suitable shunt, would bring it out, and it would get loaded. And if you're in the more remote locations, where an empty wagon was not required, you'd put it on a train and send it in, as we saw in that other photo. So weight distribution, wagons cannot be loaded over the axle load. So we mentioned axle loads. Wagons have carrying capacity, so you need to take that into consideration. Heavier loads have got to basically go over the bogie or between the bogies. And the load has got to be across the wagon. When we have a look at this setup here, we've got a wagon that can carry 51 tonnes with a tank. Then we've got a wagon that can carry 42 tonnes with a truck and trailer. The tank is 40 tonnes. Can that tank go on either wagon? Can I put the tank on the wagon with the trucks on? And the answer is no, because the difference in the floors of the two wagons, one can take a concentrated load, the other one can't. So if I was to put the tank on the MLE, the wagon would probably buckle. When they give you the carrying capacity of a wagon, that weight's got to be right across the full length of the wagon. It can't be just in the centre. Once again, loads need to be even. A load like this wouldn't get too far around your layout. First curve and you'd probably be out in the paddock somewhere. So it's important that your load sits even. Likewise here in a wagon where you've got a container on one end. The container configuration will only allow containers on the end. It was built for another type of container, but you got to load containers and you got to get it to its destination. So if you've only got a double slot wagon, on it goes. But that wagon carries 42 tonne. I can't put a 21 tonne container on the other end. If I had two 21 tonne containers, that'd be all right, but not one. In this case, it's restricted to about 12 tonne. So loading goods and freight, normally it's done by the guy who wants to send the freight. Sometimes you might get the local railway staff that will assist you, but if the load needs to be secured with some additional equipment like chains, somebody like a wagon builder might come down and load it put the chains and that on for you, so it's done in the right manner. Horses, we're aware trains move around a bit. When you brake, just think of what happens when you're in the car. If you put the foot on the brake, you'll go to the dashboard. During shunting, well, you've got forces both ways. And when you're starting, once again, if you're in the car and you plant the foot, well, you sink back into the seat. And you generally find that about every 40 wagons, you've got one wagon of slack that's built up from couplers, draft boxes, etc. Likewise, as you travel, you've got forces. The train travelling at speed, you're going to have wind in your face. In some places, you're going to have winds across the country. Like at the moment, we've got our westerly winds blowing, and there'll be certain places where we've had situations where coal wagons have been blown off the track. So give a thought for double stack containers. There's quite an area there for wind to buffer it around. Rough track, well, there's plenty of that around in parts, and it can sort of give your load a bit of a shake up, and should you hit something, well, yep, you're going to be in trouble. When you sort of have a look at marshalling some of these loads, you'll have a look at the dangerous goods code will come into play, and it might say something like long poles or lengths of steel can't be marshalled next door to flammable liquids, because if something happens and you get a pretty good jolt, there's a good chance that steel could come along and puncture that tank, and then we're in all sorts of trouble. Then there'll be cases where you have special loads where there'll be instructions issued on what's got to be done. In this case, the load needs to be marshalled behind the engine, cuts down the train forces, plus it's in a position where people can keep an eye on it. So when we look at loads and how we secure them, there's basically two types, or you can use a combination. There's the indirect, direct, and certain loads you might need both. So in this case here, a wagon full of bins, web straps. It's a indirect restraint. A wagon where the load sits down between the sides of the wagon, it's a direct restraint because the sides of the wagon is going to stop it from falling off. And you'll notice in there's some timber that unitizes the load, so there's no movement up and down the wagon. In some cases, you might throw a web strap over these, and that's the use of both of them. So once again, a direct restraint where it's a fixed load going into a fixed position and it's locked to the wagon. A lot of our loads are secured with chains, and you'll find in various manuals, etc., the angles of the chain is important. And there's a number of ways in which you can do the chains. You can sort of do them as they are on this load, where they're just all basically on the side. You can crisscross them. There'll be places where you might be able to even throw them over the load, and we'll see a bit of that a little later. The way I do my chain, I make little hooks out of normally about 10 or 12 thou brass. Drill a hole in the object that you're going to tie to the wagon. Same for the wagon, where you're going to bring your chain back to. I generally leave that loose until I put the chain on. What I do is put the chain onto the vehicle. I bring it back to the hook on the wagon. I pull that hook tight, put a bit of super glue on it, and set it. And do that for the all points that you want secured. Once you've got it all sort of secured, you can trim your hooks off, paint them black to match your chain so you haven't got a brass look. And if you've got super glue there somewhere, instead of having a shiny surface, a little bit of dull coat will help that around certain parts. As much as possible, I try to use the 40 links per inch, but on heavier loads, you might go a little bit heavier. What I did, and this is shearing elastic. Generally, the dress places will sell that. They use it in dressmaking and hat making, etc. And it's an elastic, so it stretches. And when it stretches out, when you look at it from 3 foot or whatever, it doesn't look too bad. Both these are kits, and they come up quite good. The kits, and then you can paint them to whatever colour you want. And with the dozer on the top, I made a cabin for it. That's not a part of the kit, so using a cotton reel, the roof was made in a bit of evergreen, and you'll need the load as well as the chain. Web straps, I often use tea bags or a plastic shopping bag. In this case, I use one of those hand me outs that they used to give us before we had to go environmental friendly. I just painted it blue, but at this point, and it's a secondary means, it can't be used as the primary means of securing. Often wagons that are covered with tarpaulins have a rope over them as well to keep the tarp in place. For the rope I use on the layout, I just use the cotton from the wife's sewing cabinet. These top wagon is a load of oranges, which is woodlands, and the bottom load is pineapples, and I cut long grain rice and painted it orange with dabs of green to sort of give you that just picked look. But I'm finding out that's probably not the best situation. My friendly geckos who look after my layout after dark, they seem to think it is a delicacy, and I'm going to have to redo it because half of them are gone. Wire is often used in small loads where you're going to unitize a load to go into a wagon, or if it's only got, not very heavy, you might use it to secure it to the wagon. Once again, I've just used cotton. Instead of using black, I've gone for a silver or something like that to represent the good old number 8 wire. Tarpaulins are weather protection only. There's a bit of an exemption there towards bale products like wool and hay. But as you can see from here, one size fits all applications. You can have new tarps in with old tarps, and it can sort of change the whole dynamics of your load. If you've got longer wagons where one tarp doesn't fit, you might have to use 2 or 3, but when you put them on, you've got to take into consideration the direction of travel. So you start at the back and work your way to the front so that any wind doesn't get under the tarps and balloon them up when you're traveling. Otherwise, it wouldn't be real much fun in rain. The rain would go in under the tarps and wouldn't be doing their job. When you tie them down, use the ties. Some people think you can use bogies or handbrake wheels or coupling release levers, but use the ties that are provided. This is a load of cottonseed, and as you can sort of see on this one here, the tarp is folded up. So the tarp has little ears, and through the rat line or the rope that you tie it down with, you can fold up the excess tarp so it doesn't get below the running gear. This is not a real great idea. Okay, it's a prototype picture, so I'm not saying it can't be done or wasn't done, but when that's tarps like that, it rains, that all fills up with water. There's movement of water up and down, the tarp sprays, and then on the water's all in on your freight. Plus the guys who are doing the shunting or switching, they get a free bath, and it's not real pleasant in winter. Basically, put a bit of a pitch in it. There were frames that you could put over the doors to lift your tarp up off the load if it didn't come above the doors. Also, you'll find in certain documents, in this case a rate book, it sort of says items that you can't cover with tarpaulins, and tractors, motor cars, log timber, bricks, bones, etc., etc. And some of it's pretty straightforward, but it also helps, the chart helps you sort of, oh yeah, I can have this as a load, or oh yeah, I never give this a thought. So it has 2 ways. For my tarpaulins over the years, I've used a number of things. This one here is just a piece of cloth. These 2 here are just Kleenex tissues out of the box. These 2 are gift wrap, where the tissues. It was just different things that I was sort of picking up with different people's ideas. Pardon me. But mostly now I use tea bags. After they come out of the cup, I put them aside, wash them out, dry them out, and unfold them. And generally, if I want a standard size tarp, I can get it out of a tea bag. And on the bottom one here, that's plastic sheet. It come off a medical bandage, and it was blue, and I just painted it the color I wanted to. But just be mindful, plastics these days, a lot of them are biodegradable, and in a few years' time, you might find there's no tarp on your wagon. Wheels, car vehicles. Once again, it's an era thing, depending on the era that you're modeling and how it was done. For example, here we have a wooden wagon, so it was quite simple. You just put a sleeper at the front and back and a pine chock, and you nailed it to the floor. But when it comes to a steel floor wagon, you've got to change you can't get a nail into the steel floor, so you still put your sleepers front and back, but then you put another one at the end of the wagon, and with some sawmill offcuts or timber offcuts, you unitize the load so it doesn't move. Later on, they developed ways that sort of made it a bit easier for you. You didn't have to cart sleepers everywhere. There's wagons with securing bars, and although they were used for vehicles, there was a lot of other applications you could use them for. And of course, in later dates, later years, no double deckers, triple deckers, and open wagons were enclosed. Trucks and tractors, machineries also make a great load. Here we have some tractors. The top one's been loaded in a city location. It's chained. The bottom one has been loaded in a country location. Probably hasn't got chains, so they haven't put them on. Generally, vehicles over 2 tonne required chains, but you can sort of see in this bottom photo the sides have been raised to sort of a lot better arrangement than the top one. Here I've got a front end loader. Once again, I've got my old sleepers. They're made from matchsticks. Once again, you sort of unitize the unit around the wheel, and the little pine chocks at each end. Still a matchstick, but you just cut them into little blocks and then splice them in half on the triangle, and that gives you the wedge. And of course, they'd be new out of a sawmill somewhere, so they'd not like different colour to the old sleeper. Much the same setup here. This is a woodland grade. It was a kit. So when you do it, you put the blade on, make sure the blade can come in within the wheels of the grader, not like as if it's out on the road, otherwise it would be sticking out both sides on the wagon. Cabs are generally a problem with heavy machinery, and one way to get around it is use a well wagon. I'd love to have seen how they got that on the wagon, but there's the prototype. It can be done. Trucks, much the same. They've used bars front and back here on this one, and chains. And much the same on this. I've used much the same principle, just old matchsticks, and I've chained them down in the trailer. Mentioned before, I said about eras. Nothing like a better model than an old vintage bus. It sort of goes backwards from your era, not forward, so it'd make a great load. Even in today's world with containers, you still see vehicles getting around the net. Likewise with this one, where there's chains and web straps holding the front of it in place. Caravans, you live in a touristy area, caravans often got around on rail. One thing you have to watch is the loading gauge. These vans were outside the loading gauge, so they took the wheels off. So they're just sitting on the hub. Or alternatively, if you've got air cons on the top, once again, the old well wagon can be used. And this is one on my layout where I've sort of used the securing bars, and here I've got cotton on the back to stabilize it, and over the front I've got some little chain and chocks. Wool, generally as a rule, if the network carries this sort of traffic, there'll be diagrams how to get your maximum load within a wagon, and it sort of gives you the bottom tier, the middle tier. You might notice it overhangs the sides a little bit, and then the top tier. And one for an 8-wheel wagon in a later era, because you found with wool, the bales changed. It used to be a type hessian. In later years, it became poly, and the bales got a little bit more slippery. They would slide around a bit. If you're interested in wools, that's the size of them, the weight. And here's an old timber wagon with a load of wool, 2 tarps, 2 tiers plus a few bits on top. not all loads are full loads, so you can sort of get away with 2 tiers. Here we got a new and old tarp. Once again, direction of travel all comes into play. In later years, they went with one big tarp, and of course you got a bit of machinery these days to help you, but that traffic's all ceased now. It's all put into box wagons or containers. Pardon me. Steel traffic, look, you got a open-ended book when it comes to steel. Plate, well mesh, bars, reinforcing, beams, coils, pipes. A lot of it was loaded into open or flat wagons. In some cases, in later eras, there's special wagons built for them. Loads may differ between interstate routes and local routes. When you stack loading up along the wagon, you normally have a stanchion pocket there that you can use, but then you put a base bolster down, and these wagons come fitted with a bolster, but if you didn't have that, you'd put an old sleeper or something down, put in a bundle, and then when you had to go higher, you'd put down some dunnage, and it was normally 4x4 hardwood, and the reason why it's 4x4 is you can't make a mistake. If it was rectangular, you got a narrow end and a wide edge, and if you stood it on the narrow end, you get a bump that'd fall over, and then all your securing equipment would be loose. So 4x4, you can't make a mistake. So and it all goes up straight above each other, and then your chain or whatever you're using to secure web straps goes beside it. Just some examples of steel loads on flat wagons and being secured with chains. Wide steel, sometimes you might go outside the profile of the wagon. Then it becomes a special load and has restrictions on its travel. Some locations have frames that sit the steel up on an angle, or tilt wagons that can throw it up on the side. Open wagons, bundles of steel rod, some girders, plate steel. You can notice on this one, some of it's wide. There's various thicknesses in there. Some loads I've got on my standard gauge network, they're all made out of just styrene sheet. Use anything from 5 up to 40 thou, gunmetal or roof brown, depending on what sort of look you want. Depends on where it's coming from, really. Weld mesh, I've just used fly screen here. I sort of had a bit of issues with this load, but it's just fly screen painted with a gunmetal, and once again I've used a shopping bag and as the securing means. If you don't belly wrap it, this is an indication of what could happen. The load slips around and wouldn't go too far before that started going everywhere. We have the smaller steel rod or bar. You notice it's between the bogies and it's within the door, so there's no securing equipment on it whatsoever. Generally rule, if anything was 6 inches below the door, that they generally didn't put many securing equipment on it. It was the doors held it in place of a round nature and make bundles and make it into a load. This lot is belly wrapped with a web strap as well as having a chain over it. The issue with this sort of stuff is it flattens out in transit. It's nice round bundles when it starts out, but the shaking and rattling around on the track, it flattens out, and a lot of the times the securing equipment mightn't be as tight as you'd like it. The way I've done mine is I've used fishing rod. I get a piece of timber, nail in each end, wrap it around, tie it off. I mark the piece of timber in the length that I want with these here, and then I remark the other side where I'm going to tie it off. So you noticed in those other photos that there were tie wire around to keep the bundles. I just use fine wire, telephone wire or something like that, twitch it up with a pair of pliers. Once you've done the lot that's on your board, and then where you've marked it, and that's where you cut it and you get your various lengths. Beams, once again, evergreen. A few of the other manufacturers sort of have this if you want it in brass. Heavier beams. Generally the rule, as much as possible, you stay within the profile of the wagon. You don't go out over the end of the wagon. Poor old shunters don't appreciate trying to work around bits of steel poking off the end of wagons. Some cases you'll find where loads are longer than the wagon, so one end it runs over onto another wagon. They call it a match truck or a runner, depending where you come from. But the wagons are fitted with bolsters, but in this case, there's nothing on the end, and the reason why there's nothing on the end is because you want this here so that you can run these loads. The loaders pay for everything they use, so why not use the other wagon as well to load something on it so that you can get your money's worth. And these are some of the wagons. Most wagons, our wagons are 15 metres, so 20 metres we hang it off one end, 25 metres we'll hang it off both ends. And that allows these other wagons for other loads, or if you got two going to the same place, you might just use the wagon in the centre and come across and put a lower load on the bottom of this one. This is one of the wagons where it's a resin kit, and I couldn't keep it straight, so I put a brass bar down the centre of it, and then I built the load over it. And it's never given me an ounce of trouble ever since. Wire coils, a few of them around these days on containers. There was a period where they had wagons built to carry them. The top ones I've scratch built, the rolls, they're just cotton reels, and that's enamel wire. This lot here is a manufactured coil. Once again, I've built the container, so I've got chain here, but when I come to do the load, I didn't have chain, so I've used the shearing elastic. I've used black plastic here to unitize the load around the center, and then to keep the load upright, once again, I've used web straps, which are just plastic bags cut into about 1mm strips. Coils of steel, lots of these days are special wagons, but you can adapt other wagons to carry it. And in this one here, I've used a special wagon, and I've made them from cotton reels. But if you don't want to make them, there's plenty available as off the shelf in hobby shops. Pipes, there's it's a Pandora's box really. There's all sorts of pipes: steel, poly pipe, concrete, special coating, various lengths, various diameters, various loading methods, and you can have them from a single load to a full train if you want it. Here we have concrete flood pipes across the wagon, smaller diameter wagon across the wagon and secured. Stanchions on the end to stop them from going over the head. And this is a more modern load with poly pipe on a flat rack, and it's all held into place with web strapping. These are more gas type pipe. You can get them in yellow, you can get them in black. These are actually container wagons, and they had bolsters specially made up and fitted to the wagon, and they used to run them around in train loads. This is an easy one for the modeler. It's just a fairly large diameter. You can sort of see it's 5 pipes wide. It goes up 4 pipes, and they just sit within each other. So for a modeler, it's a good easy load to run. And in this case, it's over length, so there's another wagon there behind it. These straps, once again, bolsters lined with rubber, and up here just sandbags. And in loading a lot easier. One wagon, container wagon full of 60-foot pipes. and there you have a whole train of them. Most of my pipes are made from balloon sticks. You see, they go to a shopping centre and they're handing balloons out to kids, and it's on a plastic stick. They come in all different colours, white, yellow, and here are just some yellow ones that I've sort of put on a wagon, and you can sort of see here the end bits have been cut off, and these here I just painted them a Tuscan. But these loads are removable, so if I want to run the wagons empty, I can. They just lift out. Steel balls in the mining industry. Here we have a wagon, scratch built wagon, scratch built container, and lead shot is the load. When it comes to long loads, you need to sort of be wary that there comes a point where it comes outside the other wagon or the runner that's next to it. So there is a limit to how you can do it. These are 80-foot piles going to Melbourne. So you can sort of see that they've got the extensions have been modified to carry them, and chains over them. Telegraph poles or power poles. Here we have them on a container if you're modelling the modelling era. Or in my case, where I model the 60s, I just used timber from a tree out the backyard. Sawn wood, sleepers in a wagon or wood planks or something, that bolster or basswood or something like that makes a good load. You don't have to fill the whole wagon, you just put a false floor in there, gives you plenty of room to put a bit of lead on the floor, give you a bit of weight. Once again, very similar, bundles of timber. A load of bricks. These were made up just using stamped brick styrene. You might notice I've unitised the load. I've got old tyres in here so the load can't move up and down. Once again, the web straps. Fuel drums, look at your local area. The eras where a lot of fuel was carried in drums, and you'll find the various companies that have their own colour of the drums, but loaded drums were normally loaded upright in the wagon. This one here is an empty load. You can sort of see the object is to get as many drums in the wagon as you can. Here we've used drums as a hungry board to get more in. This wagon here, I didn't have enough drums to fill the whole wagon. They're Tichy train group drums, so I only had enough drums to go about halfway down the wagon. So the rest is a false imitation. To justify the tarpaulin, I put some styrene blocks along the top to represent cartons of grease, etc., going to the depot. That way, I didn't use a full wagon of drums, and I got away with it by putting a tarp over it, which you would not normally do. Once again, Tichy drums, wagon of empty drums. Departmental. Here we got spoil. If you got heritage steam, you might want coal. You might have a drawer full of old bogies. We'll throw them in a wagon. Or as I've recently done, I've got a heap of plastic wheels. So I've added them to wagons and made wagons to accommodate them on its edge. And I believe that there's a manufacturer that make this in a plastic that is flexible. Camps, you can always make up some bits and pieces for a camp. Cylinders, cranky or off freight. These are just small consignments. Once again, I used the old screen fly wire here, a few bits and pieces. One here I've made up, I put some pellets and some gas bottles. These are just cotton reels, cut in size. The load's been unitised by using pellets on their sides. Likewise in this wagon, this was a freight forwarder, road transport, who had a wagon of rough freight. So it's sort of pellets on the end. All this stuff would be sitting on pellets as well. Gas bottles, I made them. but you can get them as a product. Boats, put a frame on them, water tanks. Even in the container world, we can have tanks, newsprint that make an interesting load. The good old days, when workplace health and safety wasn't around, well wagons that would sort of help you get heavy machinery down branch lines. Here we have a crane beam across 2 wagons with swivel bolsters. This was a concrete bridge girder. Once again, it's across 3 wagons with swivel bolsters. You might want an army train, various pieces of equipment, bridge pontoons, armoured tanks. Now you can see where I got my loading arrangements for my tanks. Old trams, petrol tanker. I actually made that one. Built the wagon, made the bogies, found a tank similar, put some decals on it. You might notice the wagon out in front has still got some of the securing equipment from the previous load, but there's no securing equipment on this one. The configuration in the timber work holds the back on, and I've used blue tack on here because I want to run the wagon empty as well as loaded. Beam wagons, shifting wagon from one network to another, and you might even want to send apples in coal wagons, grain in coal wagons, put a tarp over it. But look, in all these sorts of things, there's various loads available in the hobby shop, but you can make some, buy some, make some, mix them up, and it also adds a difference to your layout. Buy and sells, look around. I wanted a flatbed truck. I came across a cement truck, so I ripped the agitator off, threw it into a wagon, and then made the body for my truck. So I ended up with 2 for the price of 1. So, acknowledge a couple of guys for their photos, and generally network that your model have various publications and that you can sort of read to get ideas. If you want to have a look at more of my layout or loads that I model, I've got a blog spot, and generally update monthly. I've got a YouTube, and if you can't remember them, Westgate SWR will find me, or if you go onto the members area and you go into my layouts in the layout directory. So thanks guys, time for questions. Trust you enjoyed the presentation.
You have everybody mesmerized in silence. Do you buy any loads? Do you buy cars with already loads in it, or you just make them all yourself?
Like vehicles I buy, but all the other loads I scratch build myself.
Cool. So there's a few questions. What are the steel balls used for in the mining industry?
Sorry, you're breaking up on that.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, you're coming good now. Yep.
What are the steel balls used for in the mining industry?
For crushing rock. They put them in a tumbler and
Just
rotate
simply
them.
crashed?
Sorry?
Okay.
Yep.
No, that's good. And what do you use to make for the tarps?
Tarps? Most of the stuff these days I use tea bags. So I don't mind a cup of tea
Okay.
from time to time, and I dry them out and open them up, get rid of the tea, and you're left with a nice sheet, and you can sort of bend them, cut them to the standard size, and once they're on the wagon, I generally paint them once they're on the load.
So that's how you get them to keep their shape?
Yeah, I generally, I sort of glue the top or the sides, and then with the paint, I sort of push them into shape a little bit, and with the paint drying, well, that'll keep that format. And of late, I've even been putting decals on them to put the markings that you would find on tarps.
Afterwards then? After the paint?
Yep, no,
I mean,
Nope, sorry, I lost you there.
You fold it first. You
Put the tea bag as is over the load. I paint it then, and then once it's all dried, I put the decal on it after that. Because sometimes with
Okay.
the decals, you might want a gloss surface, so you might have to sort of put a gloss coat or something on. And then afterwards, it's all dry, I put a dull coat over the lot.
in the YouTube and in the Facebook group so that you can go in there and answer them.
Okay.
I'm assuming America is eating dinner right now, so
Yep. No,
come on,
that's
guys.
fine. That's fine.
So-
Thank you very much. Pleasure.
Okay, Speed, before we all leave, I think we might try to give this wheel a chat a go. We've rectified it overnight again, and we'll see how that goes. So, just getting over there. We'll give this. And sorry guys, this is just taking a little time. So the question that we've got here is, the question is, what's your name and what prototype do you model? So guys, leave that in the chat. We'll change over to our next clinician, which is here now, and we'll be back with you very shortly.
Hi there. This is Speed, not at the bottom of the helix, just at the bottom of the ramp. Today we have our current gold medal holder for the most clinics at NMRAX. Welcome back from Wisconsin, Mr. Dave Berman.
Well, let me tell you, the gold medal, I don't know quite what to think about that one. I know it's been a lot of fun, and chances are pretty good if there would have been a Gateway 2020, I would have been down there having a great time by now. But I figured I'd present some things that I would have presented down there, so that's what makes this so much fun. So I'm going to go ahead and share my PowerPoint, and we'll get started.
Please.
And here's the application window. And we'll go for the full screen. There we go. So today we're going to talk about covered hoppers. This is kind of a series of things that I've put together called Against the Grain, and it's basically dealing with the grain industry. I'll be talking a little bit more about that tomorrow. And then I'm going to show some prototypes of some things that I am going to model on the railroad that I'm currently building. Isn't very exciting to look at. It's a lot of bench work right now, but it's getting closer. So that's the good thing. So there's always a bit of history in anything that I talk about, and this bit of history is right here. This is an Athearn Pullman Standard covered hopper, about 4,740 cubic feet, they believe. The reason I got interested in covered hoppers is because I used to see these go past my home when I lived in Iowa, going to an elevator that was out in Alta where my aunt lived. And I always liked to know where those Cargill elevators were going. So I always liked to watch them go by. And so this kind of got me excited. When Athearn brought out Pullman Standard covered hoppers, I got excited because it was a car I saw. And so I had to get one of these, and I had to build one. And I've built many of these since. Might even show you a couple in a little bit, but they're a pretty cool car. We'll talk a lot about modeled covered hoppers, some that we have and some that we wish we had. We're also going to talk about some spotting features today. But with history, we got to kind of go back a little bit. Before there was a covered hopper, everything rode around in boxcars or gondolas or open hoppers. And that worked pretty well, but it had a few complications. Some of those complications included things like flour or feed that was bagged. It made it very, very difficult to handle. If you take a look at this car, I'm looking at those bags, there's not a pallet under them. Those will get hand unloaded because there's no way you're going to get those off with a forklift, which means people. Same kind of thing is shot here, this time from a container of cement. Cement is a very interesting beast. It's very hard to unload. It has a pretty interesting static charge. It also, when it gets wet, tends to stick to things. So the commodities presented problems. We had a hard time figuring out how we were going to make those kinds of things get into a car. Well, the boxcar, obviously, if you're going to put commodities in it, has to have some way of holding those commodities. So we had to have cooperage. We had to put grain doors in the boxcars. And that just didn't work. And then when we got it to where we were going to take it, we had to take those grain doors out, basically break them up. Terrible waste of material and effort. So they're always looking for a better way. They weren't very easy to load either. I model modern. I'm a modern day modeler from way back. I modeled the modern day Twin Cities, which used to be the flour milling capital of the world. But I always like to take a look back and see what it would have been like if I would model something a little earlier. This is somewhere on the Milwaukee Road on a very, very cold day with snow, and they're unloading grain into a boxcar. Just unreal to think of all the human effort it takes just to get one very small truckload of grain. It would not fill this boxcar, I'm sure. That grain has to be inspected multiple times before it leaves, when it gets to the new owner who's going to process it. All that's got to be sampled. How much water is in it? How much impurity is in it? What's the quality of the grain? Is there mold? All those things have to happen. Climbing into a boxcar is no joy. Even worse when you have a grain door. So you have to be pretty agile. This guy's got his sampling rod and he's got his bags and he's been doing some sampling, but it's still a long way down. And he had to open that door with the crowbar that's hanging on the car. Then you got to unload it. And these things are actually drawn by cables. You can just barely see the cable in the image where it's being pulled to be a shovel. Somebody had to go in there and stick it down in, and they pulled it. And it went to the door where it was dumped into bins inside of these larger elevators. It's kind of a pain. And then once we're done with that car, we got to clean it out because it might be getting a reverse load of flour. And we can't have impurities of grain in that flour if it's going to be shipped in bulk. So the boxcar was problematic. It wasn't terrible, and we used them for a number of years. I can remember seeing boxcars well into the 80s on some of the branch lines in Iowa, on the Milwaukee, the Rock Island, and the Northwestern that could not take the weight of 100-ton covered hoppers. So the problem of the boxcar didn't totally go away. But the railroads were looking for a better way. And as I went out there and started looking at how did the railroads handle it, I found a couple of really interesting things. How about a boxcar with a bottom dump? Both the CP, the D&H. The D&H had a lot of cement business. So I would imagine a lot of what they were doing was cement loading with these kinds of things. The CP, obviously, big grain hauler out of Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba. They were looking for live bottom drops. So they ended up having hatches on the bottom so they could bottom unload. And it was kind of the start of thinking, what would a covered hopper be like? Again, there are hatches on the roof so they can load from the top. It gives them some different options. Well, the Reading was thinking about it too. The Reading served the Hershey chocolate plant in Reading, Pennsylvania, or in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And they needed to haul cocoa butter. This is a car that you can buy. This is a Funaro and Camerlengo kit, resin car. Does a really nice job of building it up. This one happens to be one that somebody built for them. This was off of their web page. They have a very nice website, incidentally. It's not something I would necessarily build, but they're pretty cool. And I looked at this and they said, well, maybe. I've got some friends that might use something like this. Well, the first real covered hoppers were modifications of open top hoppers. The D&H just took one of their two-bay coal hoppers and modified it with some bottom dump outlets, gravity dump outlets in this case, a cover, and some hatches, in this case square hatches, that work perfectly, and they use those for cement. The car even says cement car. So they were thinking, there's a better way to do this. How can we think about a way to get these kinds of things? The railroads were the first. Pullman didn't start building cars until much further in. General American freight car, rail car, didn't get into it until much further in. So the railroads were really leading the way. The Pensy, this is an H30 covered hopper. Again, Funaro has these available. Nice car, looks cool. I'm thinking, gee, maybe sand service, if I was doing Conrail possibly, would have to be fairly towards the early Conrail years, but you could probably get away with it. I like the PC marks. Baltimore and Ohio were building their own wagon top cars. B&O did a ton of wagon top cars. They had cabooses, they had boxcars. Well, we better have a similar kit design covered hopper. This is one of the beautiful models that Spring Mills Depot brings out. They make wonderful kits. We'll show you a couple more of their covered hoppers coming up in just a little bit. And then, like everything else, necessity is the mother of invention. If you ship grain and you need to ship grain and you don't have enough covered hoppers, what can we do? We're going to build the hopper topper. And these were built to fit over 100-ton Bethlehem coal hoppers. I know Chessie had a bunch of them. I saw them all over on the IC. When they were desperate for cars to move grain, this was one of their solutions. I don't know how thick they were, and I'm not exactly sure. I'd get real heavy on the walking around on top of one of them. but I suspect they were pretty tough. The one that you see here is from Steel Valley Models. I believe they are still available. Another company that made them from the older days, Bill McKean from McKean Models, built some of these. You can sometimes find them at swap meets. They're probably a little harder to find in the Midwest than they are in than they might be out in some of the fringe areas of the Midwest. Occasionally I'll see them at swap meets or silent auctions because they're fairly popular when people can find them. We'll talk about how this design affected something in modern day in just a little bit too. Well, Pullman Standard was one of the first companies to get into the covered hopper business. General American Freight Car did the same kind of thing. North American Freight Car we're not sure exactly who was. I'm going to pick on Pullman Standard because they built pretty much a purpose-built car. This is the 1958 cubic foot model. It's called a PS2. Everything in the Pullman Standard line, PS2 is a covered hopper. That's why you'll see PS2 4000s, PS2 4740s, PS2 4427 cubic feet. All of those deal with Pullman Standard 2, meaning covered hopper, and then whatever cubic feet goes along with it. But it was really the first purpose-built car. And of course, we get good models of these. This is an Intermountain car. They built this particular 1958 car. Again, they do some different variations. Bowser does a very similar car. We'll kind of look at those in just a bit. But Pullman Standard might have been our first purpose-built covered hopper. I've got to do a little bit more research in that because it's not really my era, but I play around a little bit with it. And there's some of these around. You won't see them necessarily on the road, but and if you hear a horn, that's the railroad going by outside my window, not my railroad. Okay, some spotting features, some things to think about. Every covered hopper is going to have a few things that go along with it. This happens to be one of the Alberta Heritage Fund covered hoppers, cylindricals. These were all over Canada. Now they're all over the United States because the CP has brought them down here. They've gotten into lease service. They're getting around quite a bit. Intermountain makes a nice model. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Some of the things that you think about when you're spotting a car. Obviously, the first thing is running boards on top. What kind of hatches does it have? What kind of outlets does it have? How many panels are in those sides? And on top of those panels, what is the bracing that's along the top? Those are things that help me figure out who made the car and how can I model it. Again, we'll kind of go into some of these things a little bit as we go along. Let's start with our typical outside brace car. This is one of my favorites. It's an Iowa car, Clemmy Co-op grain. This is an FMC built 4700. Athearn makes this exact car and has probably done more Clemmy cars than I know what to do with it. I'm often asked, why are they pink? Well, now this one's fading to kind of white, but why were they pink? Well, originally the railroad, the company that built these things and put them out there for the elevators was called Rex Leasing. And the reporting marks were RREX. And Rex had an airplane and he liked to fly over the railroad and see where his cars were, and pink ones were easy to spot. At least that's the story I'm told. So if you're ever wondering why those pink cars, Clemmy had these, Farnhamville, varieties of different kinds of people. Again, the outside bracing is a good mark of this car. Bottom gravity dump, probably has a trough hatch on top. These are a very, very common car. We see these quite frequently now on the BNSF. The BNSF and predecessor to that, the BN, had tons of these. Even a few of these have made it into buffer service on the oil trains. Cylindrical hoppers, predominantly a Canadian product, although there were some built in the United States. This one I like because it's a remark of one of the government of Saskatchewan cars, or Saskatchewan wheat board, variety of different marks on these kinds of things. Again, cylindrical because it has a cylinder shape. It's round. The ladders and the platforms on the ends are open. Most covered hoppers you're going to find are going to have those open ends. This one happens to be a 4-bay car. They're pretty common. American Car and Foundry, now American Railcar Industries, all these companies have gone through many, many different ownerships, and as corporate structures change, they change names like the weather. But this is originally an ACF car, probably a 4650, I suspect, or 4600. Looks like a 4650 to me. That's cubic foot. How many? These are a little bit different. They have some of the cylindrical features, but they're going to have a flat top, a little bit more like the outside braid. And you'll see these cars around a lot. A lot of different makers made very similar kinds of cars to this car. The FlexiFlow. I can't count how many times I've watched people wish to have this car brought out. Rapido is now doing them. I don't believe they're out yet, but Penske had them, Penn Central had them. It'll be a big time car for the Eastern modelers and for the transition guys. I can't tell you a whole lot about FlexiFlows. It's not a car that I'm excited for me about, but I know a lot of people are going to be interested in them. Well, that works for a lot of product, grain, for instance. But when we get into some things that are much, much smaller, more powder-like, we have to have a way to get it out of the car. When we make flour, flour is a little bit harder to get out of the car. It doesn't come out as easily. So we may have to vibrate it out of the car, or we need some way to do this. These are air slide cars. American Car and Foundry, I believe, built the first air slides. I'm not sure they have the only air slides that are out there, but these cars are basically have a fluidized wall where they will pump air into them, and it will fluidize, obviously churn up the flour so it will come out. They also have pneumatic systems so they can basically suck it out. Again, we have the two-bay car up top, an Illinois Central car. On the bottom, we have a single bay, little bit smaller car, probably a 2,600 foot. The car on top is probably a 4,150 or 4,180 cubic foot car. Again, flour loading. You used to see these all over up in the Twin Cities. Well, the air slide has kind of been moved around by what's called a pressure aid car, where they use air pumped from the bottom to fluidize and up into the car. This is the beautiful car that BLMA made. Atlas now has these. These are the Trinity 5660, 5,660 cubic feet cars. I have a ton of these because they work a lot into the flour mills that I model. I know General Mills hauls a ton of oat flour out of these to make Cheerios all over the country. So I have more than a few of these. North Dakota Mill has a ton of them as well, along the railroad, at least that I model. I know that they've made them in a variety of road names and leasers. So one of the spotting features, one of the ways we look at these cars is how are they loaded? So let's think top for a second. Obviously, if we can gravity load it and we can put product in it from the top, we will do it that way. And these are called a trough hatch. The one thing about trough hatches is they get broken. And the railroads are not always picky about what kind of hatches they put on cars. So it'll be not uncommon to have, if you look from the top, if you get an aerial view of a covered hopper, it may have several different colored hatches. It may also have ribs. It may be a smooth. It may be a metal. It may be plastic. You never really can tell. The newer cars hold their hatches pretty well, but the older cars have been swapped very often. So trough loading is how a lot of grains get shipped. You can do this a little bit with flour. It's not as efficient, again, because it doesn't move quite as well. So we've got a couple of different ways of using trough loading. Flour may work a little bit through a port hatch, or in this case, a round hatch. In this case, it isn't grain we're loading. It's probably salt or some sort of mineral. You may hear me talk about that a little bit in the grain thing. But again, this is just being transloaded out of a truck. Plastics are a little bit different. Plastics have to be handled a little bit different. Sometimes inside of these cars, they're not only shipping this, they might be shipping a resin or something. So they've got a little bit different hatch. Again, sealed. Plastics are usually shipped pelletized. I work across the river in Winona, Minnesota, and we like to think of ourselves as the plastics capital of the Midwest because we have a number of people there who manufacture plastic pellets. And they grade them and they change colors and they do all kinds of things. They remanufacture them. And there's always a bunch of plastics covered hoppers hanging around the team track over by the depot. If you go through on the Empire Builder and you stop in Winona, you'll see plastics hoppers. I guarantee it. Plastics hoppers are loaded by pneumatic. Oftentimes they're also loaded gravity wise, depending on the quality. Plastic tends to take a static charge, so it's a little harder to load. Unloading gates. Well, as you can see, we have gravity. Gravity, a product that is not real dense and isn't going to pack in there very tight, is going to be easy to unload. Grain comes out wonderful through gravity gates. You may see occasionally on the side of the car, there's kind of a little bracket with some L shapes. They might have to put a vibrator on that gate or on the car just to bang. The other way to vibrate a car, even though you see all those signs that say do not bang on side of car or the no symbol with a hammer, if you want to weather a covered hopper that's old in the tooth, model some hammer marks on it, because I guarantee nobody reads the signs. And they basically just flow out. This is a typical option place where you would unload grain to transfer it maybe to a barge into a plant for milling. It just is coming out the bottom, and basically all they do is they just twist that little kind of rusty rod right there. They're actually machines that plug into those. They can literally wheel it up to the car and it just opens the gate, and here you go. Word of advice, have the hatch open on top. They empty a lot better. And we can model this. I always like to show product. Again, this happens to be a AccuRail 4650 ACF center flow car. A very nice car, very nice kit. They go together well. They go together wonderfully. But the unloading structure is from Dimensional Modeling Concepts. Mike Brusky makes these. And they're a 3D print. They go together very nicely, and they look very good if you are going to want to model some unloading at a mill or an elevator or a transload facility that would need something like this. A couple other ways you can do it. Obviously, if you're going to go to truck for transloading, just a pneumatic conveyor or a manual conveyor. Number of people are making these in 3D. I've seen them on Shapeways a lot. I see these things a couple of places. There's a Team Track spur in Winona where they transfer soda ash into trucks for fertilizer. There's another fertilizer company that has one of these. Basically, they just shove it right under the gravity gate, open it up, start the conveyor, and they're rolling it up into the truck. Well, like everything else in the covered hopper world, they've modified with the times. These are some of the newest cars out there. The one on the top with the kind of red logo on it is a Trinity. I'm trying to read Trin Flow, and basically these are all live bottom gates. When they open these up, it just basically dumps. The Trinity, there's a little nice spotting feature. If you look across the top of the car, there's a single narrow rail. That's a spotting feature of most Trinity covered hoppers. Over on the lower side, the gray car with the two kind of indented rails is a Gunderson car. And this one is totally live bottom. That's another spotting feature. A lot of Gunderson cars will have a two split rail across the top where the roof and the car join. That's how I find a lot of Gunderson cars and tell the difference between Trinities and Gundersons, because I make covered hoppers that look somewhat similar. Well, we can have a mixed bag of things. Pneumatic is the next way to do it. And basically what we're going to do is we're just going to literally pump the product out of the car. We're going to open the top and we're just going to suck it out. And in this case, we've got a little bit of help. We can actually put a little bit of air into it. We can also dump this one gravity. Multi-purpose car. The more you can do with it, the better off you're going to be. Haven't seen a lot of these. I don't suspect there are a bunch of them around, but it was one of the things I found. That little bracket above the round pneumatic port, right here. That's a VAR, and starting to vacuum the car out, or using air from the top to fluidize it and then vacuuming the car out. And if you want to fluidize it a little bit, you've got not only the way to get it out of the car, but you've got the way to put air into the car to help it flow a little bit. So covered hopper makers make a ton, but a lot of times they will. In this case, this fluidized bottom probably was part of a fluidized pressure aid car. And basically, if you're building a plant, this is a lot of the way these get unloaded. If you have a Walther's plastic pellet plant, a hose like this going into the tanks would be an interesting thing to model, because a modeler's certificate is a way to do that and make it a little bit different. Again, in this case, this one's a little bit closer to me. This is actually up near, they have a vacuum and they're just pumping what would be flour into their mill that they are going to blend, or another powdered product into their mill that they would blend. So you have no room for any buildings. You're building a shelf layout, but you got a team track. How can I model? How can I use these great covered hoppers that they keep bringing out? Well, they transfer flour almost every day in Winona to one of these trucks. These don't happen to be pictures that I've taken in Winona, but Quick Trip, if you know the Midwest, Quick Trip's a big convenience store chain in La Crosse, Wisconsin. They have a huge bakery commissary. And every day they go out and grab a covered hopper full of flour and make Glazer's donuts. Yeah, we like Glazer's donuts. Shouldn't have them, but we like them anyway. Same kind of thing with the plastics companies. They come out, they grab pellets, they put pellets into a car. They literally transfer stuff from one car to another if they have to do work on the car, or there's a reason that they have to get the load out of it to re-rail it or do something. That's what the truck in the bottom right-hand corner is doing. So you've got a couple of options. This is an easy way to do something. And these bulk trucks, Shapeways has got a guy who's doing some really pretty ones. And I talk about Shapeways a lot because I think 3D printing is really revolutionizing the hobby. My wish list has a 3D printer on it because I build a lot of grain elevators, and all of the dust handling and all the ducting and all kinds of elevator work and all the nice gingerbread on top of those elevators. The 3D printer is going to help me with that. Okay, let's talk about some of the commodities hauled. Smaller two bays because of denser product. Early on, the two bays probably did grain as well, but today most of the two bay covered hoppers that we see are hauling denser commodities such as cement. If you know Iowa, you know the north central part of Iowa near Mason City is a big Portland cement territory. The Northwestern, now the UP, and the Rock Island before them along the spine line hauled a ton of cement, and they quarried it out. It's basically limestone and some other products that they basically kiln dried to the point of being cement. Tons of hoppers, similar to the ones you see across the top. The two across the top are Bowser cars. The one in the lower left-hand corner is an Athearn 2600. This was a car that everybody was wishing for. It came out, and it's a very, very nice car. This is a Northwestern car, like you would see in that service. And right next to that one on the lower right is the Walther's. It's a Trinity car. It's a two-bay. I think it's a Trinity car. It might be a PS car. I'm not 100% sure. I got to go back and check that. But again, it's a two-bay car, used a lot in cement or roofing granules. But where these cars have tended to land lately is in sand. One of the things that the area that I live in now is very famous for is great quality sand. We have a number of fracking sand plants that have been built in west central and southwest Wisconsin that they use for pushing oil out of oil wells that's hard to get at. But we also have some really, really nice sand that makes great glass. They use it for molding. John Deere gets all of their molding supplies for their foundries in Waterloo. from a mine that's up along the river between Guttenberg and McGregor. And then obviously the railroads use it for traction. So sand has got a lot of uses. So you may see a reason to have a 2-bay covered hopper that you didn't think about, particularly if you have an engine terminal or something like that. Smaller 2-bays going on cement, sand, potash comes into the mix because potash is a fairly dense product. Again, we want to be able to haul it. Going around the corner from the upper left, Intermountain, smaller ACF car, going around to an ACF, an Atlas 3560 car for potash, going down to the bottom right. That would be the North American rail car. I always got to remember that. The NARC folks. That's one of their cars. Very, very nice car. I've got some of those in the Potash Corp scheme. And then on the bottom, the pink covered hopper. This particular one is a American Limited car. I have a little story about the pink car on this particular case. I was driving past the railroad yard up in North La Crosse, the BNSF yard, and there was a string of about 7 of these sitting there. And so I hauled out the camera and shot all 7 of them. Well, it turns out there are only 7 of them painted pink. Apparently somebody in the company wanted to honor the breast cancer survivors, so they painted them pink. I've also been told they haul a little bit different grade of commodity. You choose your story. I haven't been able to find the truth. Cylindrical hoppers, lots of them out there. Again, Intermountain makes a beautiful one. That's what you're seeing in the upper left. Moving around, going down to the lower left this time, Rapido makes a really, really nice car. Going across to the lower right-hand side is one of the cars that North American Rail Car Company is building. That happens to be their Saskatchewan car. Very pretty car. And then up right above that on the upper right is the cylindrical hopper that Walthers is doing. Again, these are pretty much Canadian cars, but they're getting around all over in lease service. I know down on the Kyle, some of the other smaller short lines have picked up a bunch of these and they're using them to haul grain around. Again, smaller 3-bays. These will be pretty much Pullman standard cars except for the Big John that you see on the bottom. We'll kind of talk about that in a second. On the upper right-hand side or upper left-hand side, that is the Athearn 2893 covered hopper, a little bit older car. Still see these around occasionally in a train. They must be in specialized service. I would be surprised if you would see much of them anymore. Concord did a car very, very similar to that car. They're still around occasionally if you can find them. That's in the upper right-hand side. Going down below, the Southern Big John hopper. That's an aluminum car. That was one of the first purpose-built large covered hoppers that was out there. Again, Exactrail makes this car, and they are very, very nice. Going over to the BN car, that one is a 4,000 cubic foot Pullman Standard. That particular car is made by a Tangent scale models. Very, very nice cars. They bring those out from time to time. Then they start to get a little bit bigger. We've got kind of a wealth of cars in the Pullman Standard 4,427 or 4,427 foot variety. The 2 across the top that you see are Walthers or Proto, now Walthers mainline. And you'll see that there are 2 different sides. One of the cars has to the top of the discharge hoppers. The other one has a little bit of skirting, low side and high side. You go down across the bottom, the one on the bottom would be the bottom right-hand side. The Frisco car is a Tangent car. Exactrail also does this car, the Bunge Corporation. Again, we've got kind of a wealth of these. They're a really nice car for that mid to late diesel, but not really into the modern day. These still run around. You see them all over the place. One of the cool things you'll see occasionally on these cars is there'll be a skipped rib where there's just a larger plate. Louis Dreyfus used to put their logo in those flat plates. We'll kind of look at that a little bit. Evans did some really, really nice cars in the 4,700 cubic feet series. The Intermountain car, the Conrail cars, the Intermountain 4785. Walthers, again, in their mainline, or I forget exactly which series it was in, did the 4780. This is a Louis Dreyfus car. You can see that nice older Louis Dreyfus logo in there. Going down to the Norfolk Southern car, that would be one of the scale trains, 4785s. And then the Rogers Grain Company car is from Tangent. That is a 4740 Pullman Standard. Again, a lot of different variations. You can look at all these different kinds of cars. You mix them up in a train. They don't all look the same. They look really, really nice as you run grain, particularly if you run a lot of small elevator jobbers. You may get a lot of different cars. Now we're getting up in some of the bigger Pullman Standard cars, the 4750s. The Corn Sweeteners is our Athearn car. We liked that car for a long time. Then Intermountain gave us one, the Lincoln Grain. This is a special car from Spring Creek Model Trains, but it's an Intermountain build. Go down below that Lincoln car to the Garvey Grain, 4750 Pullman Standard again from Tangent. And then if you go over to the Illinois Central car, you have the AccuRail 4750. Again, a very, very nice kit if you like building kits. They go together wonderfully. I don't build a ton of kits because I'm building a fairly large railroad, but I've built a number of these AccuRail cars because they fit together really nicely and they're a lot of fun to build. More larger 3-bays. We're starting to get into a little bit bigger car, a little bit more ornate. In this case, we'll start with the CSXT, or the Richmond Fredericksburg Potomac. This is a car from Atlas. This is the Thrall 4750. Different builder, different roof style. It's a flat roof. The Pullman Standards have a curved roof, another spotting feature. Next to that is the AccuRail 47 or 4650 car. Nice car, no problems with that. It builds up nicely. Okay, we go down. We have two NS cars. The one that's a little bit more bluish gray is the Intermountain 4650 car. That's a pretty nice car. And then the more lightish tan gray in the bottom lower would be the lower right. That is one of the Trinity cars from Athearn. Now, a number of people have done Trinity cars. Actually, E&C shops or did a bunch of them for a number of runs. They are no longer available. They're a little bit harder to come by, but if you find them, they're very, very nice cars as well. If you're getting tired of covered hoppers, we got more to go. So, okay, KCS cars, the new Athearn 4650. I understand Arrowhead Models is doing a 4650 as well. Again, that's a very, very 4600. I'm sorry, my bad. 4600 cubic foot car. Hard to tell the 4650s and the 4600s, but their spotting features are a little bit smaller. If you put the two together, you can definitely notice the difference. The IC car, the darker gray car, is one of the newer Walthers NSC, National Steel Car Corporation from Canada, 5150, a very welcome addition for me because there are a lot of these cars floating around. National Steel Car is doing a little bit bigger car that's made it into the potash market and into the grain market that I hope somebody will do someday. And then right below that, the KCS, the white KCS car is the Scale Trains 5188 car. These are an absolutely beautiful car. They started to tool them up with different outlet hatches or different hatches on top. They're tooling them up with different outlet hatches in the bottom for gravity, for pneumatics, so you can use the car for some different kinds of loads for different places. Air slides, well, we've got lots of them. The Penn Central car is a little bit of a strange beast. Excuse me. That's a Tangent car, and it's what's called a dry flow. And exactly how it works, I don't know, but I know they used them a lot in malting and hauling malt to breweries. And they were fairly common on the Great Western. I know that they ran around up here in the upper Midwest to Milwaukee and a lot of the brewing places. Then a bunch of single bay air slides. The Burlington Northern car is a Walthers car. I haven't seen these in production for a long time, and they are a kit. They go together pretty nicely. There's a couple little things on them, but if you can get a hold of them, they build up nicely. The two on the bottom are a little bit harder to come by. Concord makes a very, very nice, ready-to-run air slide in both open end, and then they've got a little bit of the diagonal end. So that's one of the cool features that's hanging around up there. And then the regular 2-bay air slides, the 4150s and the 4180s. The first one, the Northwestern, that was the Walthers. That was the first one that was out. But since then, Tangent, the Rock Island car, and the CSX car, Scale Trains have done some really nice, heavily detailed, if you're into lots of detail and nice models. Pneumatic cars. We're starting to see more of these, and I'm hoping we see a few more of them as we go. In this case, the first one you see, the Trinity Power Flow, is a Walthers car. These haven't been run in a while. I'm kind of hoping to see them come back because there's still a few of these floating around. The Penn Central Flexi Flow, you've seen that name before, but this is a North American car, just like some of the earlier covered hoppers. This is let's try that again. North American PD, pressure differential, 3,000 cubic foot car, Spring Mills Depot. Really nice cars. They made them in a ton of road names, pretty much everybody who had them. And then I don't have one. This is an undeck from one of my pools. That's the that's the pneumatic pressure differential car from previously BLMA. They started it. Atlas has them now, and I believe they're going to rerun them. More pneumatic cars, lots of Atlas, lots of different kinds of things. The Rexall chemical car is one of those oddballs. A long time ago, a guy named Bill McKean, remember the Hopper Toppers, had a 62-foot plastics car. And that thing got done in a bunch of road names, and you got a chance to see it out there. They're a kit. They're a little bit cranky in some of the fit, but they can be made to fit really, really nicely if you build them and you take your time. If you can find one of these cars, it's a different car than the others that you see on the page. Right next to that, the CPCX is a Atlas 5800 or 5800. In this case, it's a plastics car. The NAHX down in the lower left-hand corner is a National Steel car. I've seen this car done two ways from Walthers, both in a grain with a gravity dump for distiller's grain. We'll kind of look at that here in a minute. And then as a plastics car. And then the one that I have that is just a drawing on the lower right is the newer Atlas 5800 car that they're coming out with shortly. Distiller's grain. With the rise in ethanol, a new byproduct has basically been produced. Now, when you've been brewing beer all along or doing any other kind of distilling, there's always been a product that's called spent grain. Well, when you make ethanol, you make a lot more of it because if you're using corn, it makes a lot more spent grain than it does in the barley brewing process. So, and it's become a very, very viable product for feeding cattle and other things, I understand. There are two kinds of distiller's grain. There's dried distiller's grain and there's wet distiller's grain. The dried distiller's grain goes in the two covered hoppers that you see up top. Again, the one on the left-hand side with the ADM logo is a 5701 cubic foot ACF car. You can see a little bit of the spotting features on that. Again, trough loading. It has 4 bays. Most of these are going to have 4 bays because dried distiller's grain isn't as heavy as regular grain, so you can haul more. The Verisun Energy car, which is a hard car to get, they tell me. I've got a few of them. With the TLX reporting marks is a Walthers, again, National Steel car. No, this one's a Trinity, I believe, looking at the marks. But they also do these in the National Steel car occasionally too. Not the Vera Suns, but obviously. Those are good cars. Those 4 bays, they look really, really nice in a dry distiller's grain. If you're servicing an ethanol plant, you're going to have these. And then the things along the bottom. Let me tell you a little bit about those. Kato, a couple of years ago, produced a number of years ago, produced Bethcons. And in order to sell a few more Bethcons, they discovered that Cargill Corporation, or Cargill Grain, produces a product out of their wet distiller's grain called Sweet Bran. And it has to be hauled a special way. It has to move very quickly because if it dries out, it's like cement. And it tends to like aluminum cars to come out of. Well, we didn't have many aluminum covered hoppers. And even if we did, if it dried out in there, we'd never get it out and scrap the car. Well, there were a few coal cars around that were extra. So they steam cleaned them out and they built a canvas cover that swings out, and they basically rotate these things and dump the Sweet Bran. It's being used heavily in Texas at the feedlots. If you've ever driven down, I believe it's Highway 41 into between Oklahoma and New Mexico, you go by miles of feedlots. And so Dalhart, Texas, and Amarillo have facilities that Cargill dumps these cars. The cover you see is a 3D print by one of my friends. If you saw Tim Odenhoven earlier today talk about his car ferries, he's one of my 3D printing, and he's one of my buddies that I model with him a lot. He's producing these. Proto Loads is producing these for sale. So there are some varieties in HO. The Katos are only in N. I have been after them to say, why don't you make some in HO? We don't make the car. Case closed. Cars on my wish list, or on everybody's wish list. I watch the Atlas sites. I watch Facebook. I watch train orders. Cars everybody is begging for. Up at the top, the UMPX. That's a Richardson Plastics hopper, only made in brass. They didn't make very many of them. Hard car to get if you want one. Below that, outside brace car in gold, in this case full brass, is a Pullman Standard 5800 pellet car designed for hauling plastics. Again, only made in brass. Hard to come by. Going to the upper left, the CGTX car is a sodium chlorate hopper. Short, cylindrical car. It's not an impossible kit bash, but it would be really nice if somebody would do these. The paper mill people would love you because that's one of the products that's used. If you go kitty corner to that, the Cargill card on the bottom, I believe, is also something very similar, a sodium chlorate car. That would be the one in the lower right hand car. And then there's this nice little aluminum hopper Cargill that's in the lower left. Again, that's a car that for a while was all over up in the grain fields of Iowa. Cargill had them. They'd have blue ends that were silver, that were a leasing company. That would be a really nice car for somebody to do. I don't know if any of these cars have enough commercial value for things, but in this case, I was surprised that Scale Trains did the carbon black covered hoppers because a lot of people have been asking for those, and Walters did a really nice tire plant. I'm hoping that maybe some of these cars might be in somebody's future, and maybe by the end of the week we might hear about one of these. Can only hope. I didn't show the Scale Trains carbon black cars. I also noticed I missed the Atlas 3 and 6 bay cylindrical cars. There are so many covered hoppers out there, but there's still a few left to do. So there's a lot of options out there for modeling covered hoppers, and it makes a pretty cool thing. I'm right about at 6:50, so that means I got about 10 minutes for questions. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and see if we can come back to the camera. And I'll answer questions if there are any.
Speed, we can't hear you.
First question, Dave. Who determined?
Modern day, it's done by basically a car management department. A lot of times it's just It's just computer driven. Most of the elevators now are running full unit trains out in Iowa. Some of the calls those earthworms. The UP runs them. The CN runs them for the BNSF into Iowa. And basically, they'll run 110 cars out there, say, you have 48 hours to load these from the time they cut off the power. And the crew comes back in 48 hours and they better be ready to go, or the cost starts to go ching, ching, ching like the bell on your gas pump. So they do a pretty good job of getting those loaded. Almost all of them have small critter engines or other engines that they can literally shove these cars in as fast as they can load them. Hence, trough loading. In the old days, they might take a local out with 15 cars, and each elevator would get a certain amount of the cars that they had in the train.
Okay. When were the first covered hoppers produced?
Way back in the 1800s, actually, in that era, but they were probably purpose-built, home-built cars. Really, we started to see the advent of the steel-covered hopper after World War II, when welding production techniques had really hit. Obviously, if you can weld a tank together, you can weld a covered hopper together. And a lot of companies that were building military vehicles, armored vehicles, transferred what they learned from that into building rail cars.
Do you know when Pullman Standard started making their covered hoppers?
1950s, from what I understand. I've got a little bit more digging to do on Pullman Standard's entire history, but I saw most of the 1950s, 1940s, late 40s, early 50s, post-war.
What is the average lifetime for these covered hoppers?
Well, covered hoppers have a life cycle, and it tends to go from hauling grain to hauling fertilizer to hauling sand, and the last, or orange red rust, it's probably either has been in salt service or it's going to be in salt service. Fertilizer is very corrosive, sand not so much, but it's obviously a grinding agent. Salt is really, really bad, and we get a lot of salt in the upper Midwest because we get ice. Ice needs salt to melt. It also kills your cars. If you see what it does to your car, you understand what it does to the covered hoppers.
Someone asked, what is the correct car type for cement?
For cement, probably a 2-bay covered hopper. In that case, the ACF 2-bays, the 2900s that Intermountain makes, you could use that Walthers. You can use those Walthers cars. If you're in an older period, Bowser's smaller PS2s, the 2600s, the Athearn 2600, those work pretty well for cement. Again, cement's a very dense commodity. Gravity gates, because it's going to have to come out.
So someone noticed that you have some unloading detail between your tracks. Might have been in a photo that you shown.
Yes.
Can you tell who made that?
Dimensional Modeling Concepts. Guy named Mike Brusky, Brusky. He's out of Omaha. He did a bunch of work on Steve Priest's layout that's absolutely gorgeous. He made a beautiful draught container loader that goes along the rails. Absolutely beautiful. But he's doing a ton of stuff. He also made a barbed wire machine. He's doing all kinds of interesting stuff. It's kind of a one-man operation, so it's not always super fast, and he produces to order. So, but if you put something in the chat, I'll see if I can get you his email address.
Okay. I believe the Facebook chat died, so it's we only have the YouTube.
Well, I'll put my email address out tomorrow when I do the grain thing and see if I can, the prototype thing, and see if I can have somebody send me an email.
Okay. Would you know if there are any pictures of those 1800 covered hopper cars on the internet?
Well, I can tell you the internet has one of everything. If you go looking, but I haven't seen any of those. But I haven't been specifically looking for them either. So I'll see what I can do. That's one of those things I'll add.
And someone asked if you know if Athearn makes a 3-bay cement car.
A 3-bay cement, actually the 2893 wouldn't be a bad 3-bay cement car. Some of the Mexican roads, I've seen Cemento, Ferrogrupo Cemento. Oh, now you're really going to get me into things because I don't speak Spanish. I've seen them in that particular area, and a lot of the Hispanic Mexican cement importers use those 3-bay 2893s. I can say specifically both Athern and Concord did some road names in them.
I was not going to disclose.
I can't tell you what they do.
I was not going to disclose who asked the question, but you're spot on.
That's okay.
Well, Dave, I believe we have to restart the server to get Facebook going. I'm not sure what the cameraman has planned. So thank you very, very much for another awesome clinic.
I'll be back tomorrow for 2 of them and I guess a roundtable with Gordy, which ought to be fun because I'm working with Dan Munson, and he and I did tours in Kansas City, and we riff off each other pretty well. So we should have some fun.
Thank you very much.